The first sign that Lady Rowena Peverell had been abandoned was not the empty chair beside her, nor the cool space where Mr. Quentin Loxham ought to have stood during the interval, but the sudden stillness of opera glasses, turning one by one toward her family box. London, in the spring of 1816, could forgive debt if it was hidden behind good tailoring. It could forgive vanity if it was softened by a title. It could even forgive cruelty, provided cruelty wore kid gloves and spoke French at supper. But it did not forgive a woman who had been publicly left. Rowena knew this before the footman reached her. She knew it from the way her aunt's fan stopped moving. She knew it from the small, triumphant breath Lady Christabel Peverell drew beside her. She knew it from the glittering tiers of the King's Theatre, where candlelight trembled over gilt railings and painted ceilings, and where every box seemed suddenly occupied not by music lovers, but by judges. The opera had paused for the interval. Gentlemen moved between boxes with practiced ease. Ladies leaned close under plumes and diamonds, pretending not to stare. Below, the pit murmured with restless masculine voices, somewhere behind the curtain. A singer laughed too brightly. Rowena sat very straight, with her gloved hands folded over her reticule, feeling the small weight of her mother's amber vinaigrette inside it. She had carried it since her first season, not because she was delicate, though society preferred delicate women, but because crowded rooms had a way of stealing the air when people smiled with malice. Amber glass, a silver cap, a faint, sharp scent. Her mother had once pressed it into her hand and said that steadiness was sometimes a thing one must borrow until it became one's own. Rowena had borrowed it often. Tonight she would not yet. How odd, Christabel murmured, tilting her pale head just enough for the diamonds at her ears to catch the light. Mr. Loxham promised he would come to our box as soon as the curtain fell. Rowena did not look at her cousin. Christabel had been beautiful since childhood in a way that made adults excuse her before she had even sinned. Soft fair hair, rose-leaf skin, a smile that always seemed innocent to those who had never been cut by it. Perhaps he was delayed, Rowena said. Her own voice sounded calm. That was something. Her aunt, Mrs. Valechurch, shifted in the chair behind them. Gentlemen are often detained, but no one believed that. Quentin Loxham was never detained when display was useful. He had a gift for arriving at the exact moment admiration could be harvested. He had been attentive all winter, careful all Lent, and almost tender on he had asked Rowena to wear the pearl comb he favored. He had said it made her look composed. She had taken that for admiration. She understood now that he had meant convenient. A footman in dark livery appeared at the box entrance. Not one of the Peverell servants, not one of Quentin's either, though his hesitation suggested he had been paid by someone who wished not to be named. He bowed too low. Lady Rowena Peverell, the name carried. Of course it carried. Several faces in the neighboring box turned. Christabel's fan opened with a whisper like a blade leaving its sheath. Rowena lifted her chin. Yes. The footman extended a folded opera program. From Mr. Loxham, my lady. Her aunt made a small sound. Rowena took the program. The paper was warm from the footman's hand. That small human warmth disgusted her. She unfolded it carefully. Because she would not snatch, would not tremble, would not give the watching theatre the satisfaction of seeing her become what it wanted. At first, she saw only the printed cast list, the familiar names blurred by candlelight. Then something slid into her lap. Her betrothal ring, a modest diamond set in gold, chosen by Quentin with much talk of taste and prudence. It had been tied with a narrow black ribbon and tucked through a slit cut into the program. For a moment, Rowena looked at it as if it belonged to some other woman, some careless creature in a tragic novel, not to herself. The ribbon smelled faintly of heavy violet perfume. Not hers, never hers. Christabel's breath touched the side of her cheek. "Rowena," she whispered, and the false pity in that single word was almost worse than the ring. Across the theatre, a low ripple of recognition passed from box to box. Rowena followed the line of glances before she could stop herself. Quentin stood in Lord Mariscombe's box opposite, his dark head bent toward Christabel's empty seat as though he had expected her there. Then Christabel rose beside Rowena, graceful as a swan and just as cold beneath the white. "Forgive me," she said softly. "I believe I am wanted elsewhere." Her aunt caught her wrist. "Christabel, sit down." "Aunt, please. Don't make a scene." The cruelty of it was perfect. Christabel left the box in pale silk, and Quentin looked up as if summoned by fate rather than calculation. Half the theatre watched her cross behind the tears. By the time she appeared beside him, London had already understood. The fiancé had returned the ring to one woman and received the cousin before the interval ended. No raised voice had been needed, no scandalous embrace, only a ribbon, a program, and the geography of public shame. Rowena's fingers closed around the ring. The diamond bit lightly through her glove. She wanted absurdly to laugh, not because anything was amusing, but because the mind sometimes reached for laughter when pride had no other weapon near enough. "We should leave," her aunt whispered. Immediately, Rowena's lungs tightened. Leave. Yes, that was what abandoned women did. They left by side corridors with lowered veils, guided by older female relatives who spoke of headaches and carriage drafts. By supper tomorrow, the sorcery would have improved in cruelty. By the end of the week, she would have begged. By next season, she would have schemed. The ring in her hand would become proof not of Quentin's cowardice, but of her insufficiency. She reached for her reticule at last. The amber vinaigrette slipped from her unsteady fingers before she could close them around it. It fell, struck the polished wood near the box rail and rolled toward the narrow passage. Rowena bent instinctively, but another hand reached it first. A man's hand, ungloved, long-fingered, steady. The murmuring nearby thinned into a silence of another kind. Rowena looked up and saw Roland Westgrave, Duke of Halewick. Every woman in London knew his name, and most had been taught to lower their voices when speaking it. He was not the eldest duke, nor the richest, though he was rich enough to make that distinction meaningless. He was feared because he never wasted words, never softened judgment for convenience, and had once ruined a viscount's political hopes with a single letter written after dinner. There was a pale scar near his temple, just visible beneath dark hair brushed with severe precision. His evening coat was black, his waistcoat white, his expression unreadable. He stood at the entrance to the Peverell box, as though the theatre had been built around the fact of his authority. The amber vinaigrette rested on his palm. He did not close his fingers over it. He did not offer his arm. He did not touch her. "Lady Rowena," he said. His voice was low enough that only those nearest could hear, but deep enough to alter the air. "I believe this is yours." Rowena rose because remaining seated felt suddenly impossible. Her knees did not fail her. For that, she thanked every quiet lesson in endurance she had ever learned. She took the vinaigrette from his open palm. Their gloves did not meet, yet the restraint itself seemed more intimate than touch. He had seen the fallen object, He had seen the ring. He had seen Christabel cross to Quentin's box. More dangerously, he had seen Rowena's refusal to collapse. "Your Grace," she said. "You are kind." His gaze flicked once toward the opposite box. Quentin had gone pale. Christabel's fan had stopped moving. "No," the Duke said. "I am observant." Her aunt struggled to stand behind her. "Your Grace, this is a private family matter." "Madam," he replied, without looking away from Rowena, "there are at least 40 opera glasses directed at this box. Privacy has already been stolen." The words moved through Rowena with strange force. Not comfort, not pity, recognition. He stepped slightly to one side, positioning himself between Rowena and the brightest line of sight from the opposite tier. The shift was small, almost casual. It blocked Quentin's view of her face. It blocked Christabel's, too. Something inside Rowena that had been braced for impact found, unexpectedly, a wall. "You have two choices," the Duke said quietly. "You may leave by the rear passage, and they will say you fled. Or you may leave through the main corridor, and they will be forced to remember that you walked." Her aunt inhaled sharply. "Your Grace, that would draw more attention." "Attention is already drawn." Rowena looked at him then, truly looked. His face was stern, but not eager. There was anger in him. Though it was leashed so tightly, another woman might have missed it. He was not enjoying her rescue. That mattered. Men who enjoyed rescuing ruined women often enjoyed the ruin first. "Why should you concern yourself with how I leave?" she asked. It was too direct for a theatre box, too raw for an interval. His eyes held hers. Grey, not cold exactly, but disciplined against warmth, because a coward has attempted to make your composure look like guilt. Rowena's throat tightened. For the first time that evening, she feared she might weep. She did not. "And what would you have me do, Your Grace?" "Not crawl out of a theatre where you entered honestly." The sentence struck so close to the thought in her own mind that she almost stepped back. Instead, she looked once more toward Quentin's box. He was watching now, with an expression caught between alarm and resentment. Christabel leaned near him, whispering. Lady Mariscombe, seated behind them, lifted her opera glass with the slow satisfaction of a woman who believed herself present at the beginning of a magnificent scandal. Rowena placed the returned ring inside her reticule. She kept the black ribbon around it. Some instinct told her not to untie it. Then she closed the clasp. "Very well," she said. "I will leave through the main corridor." Her aunt whispered her name in protest. Rowena did not turn. The Duke inclined his head, and only then did he offer his arm. Not as claim, as escort, as shield made visible. Rowena rested her gloved fingertips upon his sleeve. The contact was proper, light, and necessary, nothing more. Yet the theatre seemed to draw one collective breath. They stepped out of the Peverell box together. Conversation retreated before them in small, cowardly waves. Ladies pretended to adjust shawls. Gentlemen bowed because rank compelled what conscience might not have done. Rowena felt every stare like heat on bare skin, but she kept her eyes forward. At the bend of the corridor, Quentin moved as though to intercept them. "Rowena," he said. He had no right to use her name. Not now, not with her ring tied in mourning black inside her reticule. The Duke stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Mr. Loxham, you have already returned what honor allowed you to return. Do not attempt to reclaim conversation as well." Quentin flushed. "This doesn't concern you, Your Grace." The Duke's gaze moved over him with merciless calm. "You made it concern every person in this theatre." Christabel appeared behind Quentin, her cheeks prettily pink. No one wished to hurt Rowena. These matters of the heart are so unfortunate. Rowena felt the old habit rise in her, the habit of silence, of letting prettier women define the shape of every room. She inhaled once, amber and violet, her mother's steadiness and Christabel's perfume. "No," Rowena said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the nearest listeners. "Unfortunate is rain on a wedding morning. This was arranged." The Duke did not look surprised. That, too, frightened her a little. Quentin's mouth tightened. Lady Mariscombe's opera glass lowered. For one beautiful instant, the corridor held still around Rowena instead of closing over her. Then the Duke said, "Lady Rowena, your carriage waits." She allowed him to lead her on. Behind them, whispers rose again, but they sounded different now, less certain, more hungry. That was dangerous, perhaps, but it was better than pity. At the stairs, Rowena paused and looked back once, not at Quentin, not at Christabel, but at the glowing theatre where she had lost the future she thought she understood. The music would resume soon. The soprano would sing. London would pretend it had witnessed entertainment rather than cruelty. Her hand tightened over the reticule. The ring was still inside. The program was still inside. The black ribbon was still tied. The Duke noticed. Of course he noticed. "Keep them," he said under his breath. "Why?" "Because people who arrange public scenes often forget that objects remember what mouths deny." Rowena looked at him sharply, but his face had closed again. At the foot of the stairs, Lady Mariscombe's voice drifted from above, soft, venomous, and clear enough for several nearby guests to hear. "A woman does not gain a duke by accident." Rowena stopped. Roland Westgrave stopped with her. She expected him to answer. Instead, he waited. The choice came back to her, again shaped differently this time, hidden or seen, silent or standing. Rowena lifted her chin and continued toward the front doors beneath the blaze of chandeliers, walking beside the most feared duke in London, while the world behind her began, with exquisite malice, to wonder whether Lady Rowena Peverell had just been ruined or chosen. By the time Rowena reached Peverell House, the returned ring had grown heavier than any jewel had a right to be. It lay inside her, reticule with Quentin's folded opera program, and the narrow black ribbon still tied around the gold, as if a little strip of mourning cloth could make his cowardice appear solemn rather than staged. Her aunt sat opposite her in the carriage, trembling with suppressed distress, while the lamps of Mayfair passed in blurred yellow strokes across the windows. Neither woman spoke for half the journey. There were silences that comforted. This was not one of them. This silence was crowded with opera glasses, lifted brows, Christabel's pale silk disappearing toward Quentin's box, and the Duke of Halewick's voice cutting through humiliation with impossible calm. Objects remember what mouths deny. Rowena pressed her fingers against the reticule clasp. She did not yet know why His Grace had said it, but the words had entered her mind like a key turning in a lock. "We shall say you were unwell," Mrs. Veilchurch said at last. "Your head ached. The heat of the theatre overcame you. Mr. Loxham behaved badly." "Yes, but we must not make matters worse." Rowena looked at her aunt's anxious face in the dim carriage. Mrs. Veilchurch was not cruel. She was afraid, which in society often produced the same result. Worse than receiving my ring in a program while my cousin crossed to his box. "My dear, you must think of tomorrow." "I am, Mrs." Veilchurch shut her eyes. "Then think carefully. London punishes women for being injured in public." Rowena turned toward the window. Outside, a groom led a pair of restless horses across the street, and a gentleman laughed too loudly beneath a portico as if the whole city had not just tilted beneath her feet. "Then I must not look injured," she said. Her aunt made no answer. Peverell House was narrow, respectable, and colder than it ought to have been in spring. The lamps had been left burning in the entrance hall, which meant the servants knew something had happened. Before Rowena stepped through the door, news travelled faster than carriages when carried by shame. The butler bowed too low. A maid stared at Rowena's empty left hand, then looked away too late. Rowena gave her cloak to no one. She walked into the small drawing room and placed her reticule on the centre table with care. Her aunt followed, wringing her gloves. "You should go upstairs." "No, Rowena, if I go upstairs now, everyone in this house will learn that I must be handled like broken porcelain." She opened the reticule and removed the opera program. The ring slid into her palm with the ribbon still fastened. The scent rose again, heavy violet, sweet enough to feel indecent. She had smelled it all season, whenever Christabel leaned close in ballrooms, whenever her cousin embraced her before turning to whisper elsewhere. Rowena set the ring on the table. Christabel touched this before it was sent. Mrs. Veilchurch paled. "You cannot know that. I can smell it. Perfume is not proof." "No," Rowena said, "but it is not nothing." The drawing-room door opened before her aunt could reply. Christabel entered, wearing the expression of one who had been crying for someone else's benefit. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes bright, and her white evening gloves were still buttoned at the wrist. She had not gone home in distress. She had prepared. "Rowena," she breathed. "I came as soon as I could. It was all so dreadful." Rowena looked at the ring on the table, then at her cousin. "Was it?" Christabel stopped. "How can you ask that?" "Because you crossed to his box before the interval ended." Quentin was distraught. He had just returned my betrothal ring. He didn't know what else to do. The answer was too quick. Mrs. Veilchurch sank onto the sofa, one hand at her throat. Rowena remained standing. She realized, with a strange calm, that she had not lost Quentin tonight. She had lost the obligation to pretend ignorance. "He might have spoken to me privately," she said. "He might have written before the opera. He might have stayed away entirely. Instead, he sent a ring through a footman and waited for London to watch my face." Christabel's eyes sharpened, then softened again, so swiftly another person might have missed the change. "You always make things sound harsher than they are. Matters of affection are confused." This was not confusion. Then what was it? Rowena touched the black ribbon with one fingertip. Arrangement. Christabel's mouth parted. For 1 second, the room held the truth between them. Then she smiled sadly. "Poor Rowena. You mustn't let humiliation make you unjust." The word humiliation landed exactly where Christabel meant it to land. Rowena felt it. She did not bend. "Take care," she said quietly. "Tonight I have been abandoned, but I have not become foolish." Christabel's color rose. Before she could answer, the knocker sounded below. 3 hard strikes, evenly spaced. Not a friend's call at an improper hour. Not a neighbor curious for gossip. Authority had a sound. The butler appeared moments later, visibly strained. "The Duke of Halewick, my lady." Mrs. Veilchurch stood so quickly, her fan fell to the carpet. Christabel went still. Rowena closed the reticule over the program, ring and ribbon. "Show his grace in." Roland Westgrave entered without haste. In Peverell House's modest drawing-room, he seemed even taller than he had at the theatre, less because of height than because he brought silence with him and expected it to obey. He had removed his hat and gloves. His scar caught the lamplight faintly. His eyes moved once over the room. Mrs. Veilchurch anxious, Christabel too composed. Rowena beside the table with her chin lifted and the evidence already hidden. He bowed first to Mrs. Valechurch, then to Rowena. Only afterward did he acknowledge Christabel. The order was not accidental. "Forgive the hour," he said. "The matter would not improve by morning." Christabel recovered first. "Your Grace, surely. Lady Rowena requires rest, not more disturbance. Lady Rowena can tell me what she requires." Rowena felt those words settle differently from every instruction she had heard that night. Not rescue, not dismissal. A question waiting behind a statement. "I can receive His Grace," she said. Mrs. Valechurch fluttered. There must be propriety. "Then you and my cousin may remain." The Duke's gaze touched Rowena's face, and something like approval passed through it, gone almost before she could name it. Christabel sat slowly, displeased at being trapped by propriety she had tried to invoke. Roland remained standing. "Mr. Loxham has already begun correcting the story." Rowena's pulse tightened. "Correcting? He has told 2 gentlemen at Brooks that your conduct at the theatre left him no honourable alternative." Mrs. Valechurch gasped. Christabel looked down at her fan. Rowena's hand found the back of a chair. She did not grip it. "My conduct, being escorted by me. After he returned my ring, that portion appears to have become inconvenient." The room seemed smaller. Rowena heard the faint hiss of the fire, the creak of Christabel's fan sticks, the blood in her ears. Quentin had not merely abandoned her. He had thrown her into water and then accused her of being wet. "What does he want?" she asked. "To make himself the injured party before anyone asks why the injury was arranged." Roland paused. "I can act in 2 ways. The first is public denial. I can state that I escorted you at your aunt's request after Mr. Loxham's discourtesy. It may soften tonight's gossip." "Soften?" Rowena repeated. "Not end." No. She appreciated the honesty, though it hurt. "And the second way," Mrs. Valechurch whispered. "Your Grace." Roland did not look away from Rowena. "Marriage under special license." Christabel's fan snapped shut. "That is absurd." "It is direct," he said. "Those are not the same." Rowena stared at him. The word marriage should have shocked her more. Perhaps shock had limits, and she had spent hers beneath the chandeliers of the King's Theatre. "You would marry a woman abandoned by another man in front of half London." "I would marry a woman another man attempted to dishonor in front of half London." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you risk your name for mine?" For the first time, the Duke's expression changed. Not softened, exactly, deepened, as if something old had moved behind the grey of his eyes. "Because I know what it is to watch a woman punished for another person's cowardice." Christabel's gaze flashed toward him. Rowena saw it. So did he. "What woman?" Rowena asked. "Not one I have the right to discuss tonight." "Then you ask me to trust a locked door." "No, I ask you to choose with the door acknowledged." That answer stopped her. Men lied most easily when pretending nothing was hidden. He had admitted the hidden thing and refused to decorate it. It did not make him safe. It made him less false than the others. "If I say no," she asked, "then I will make the public denial. I will see you escorted safely where you wish to go. I will not trouble you again unless evidence requires it." Evidence. The word flickered between them. Rowena opened her reticule and removed the program, the ring, and the ribbon. She placed them on the table. Christabel's eyes dropped to the black ribbon before she could stop herself. Roland noticed. "Keep them," he said. "I intend to." Rowena drew a breath. "If I accept, I will not be treated as a rescued burden. I will not be hidden until society finds another woman to devour. I will not have decisions made over my head because your title is larger than my voice." Mrs. Veilchurch covered her mouth. Christabel stared, as though Rowena had spoken indecently. The Duke did neither. He inclined his head. "Then let that be the first term." "There will be terms. There should always be terms when one life is placed in another person's keeping." Her throat tightened, but this time not from fear. "And what do you require?" "Truth when you can give it. Honesty when you cannot yet give trust. And the program. The program, only to examine. It will remain yours." She studied him for one long breath. Then she slid the folded paper toward him, keeping the ring beneath her own palm. A small distinction. He understood it. He took only the program. His fingers did not brush hers. Christabel rose. "Rowena, you cannot mean to do this." Rowena looked at her cousin, at the beautiful face that had watched her humiliation bloom from the next chair. "I meant to marry a gentleman who returned my ring like a theatre token. My judgment has already suffered enough for one night." The Duke's mouth did not smile, but his eyes changed. A spark, brief and dangerous. Mrs. Veilchurch whispered, "My dear, are you certain?" Rowena looked down at the ring. Once, it had represented a future narrow but respectable, chosen for her comfort by everyone but herself. Now it looked small, smaller than a life, smaller than her dignity. She closed her hand around it and lifted her head. "No," she said, "but I am certain that I will not let Quentin Loxham write the end of this evening." Roland folded the opera program once and held it at his side. "Then, tomorrow I will send my solicitor. The license will be arranged properly. You will have time to read the settlement. You will have time to refuse. And if I do not refuse—" The room seemed to hold its breath. "Then, Lady Rowena," he said, "you will enter my house as Duchess of Halewick, not as a scandal I collected from the opera." Outside, a carriage rolled past over the stones. Inside, no one moved. Rowena felt the shape of the night altar again. Not healed, not safe, but changed. Christabel looked at her as though seeing, with rising horror, that humiliation had not made Rowena disappear. It had placed her where even a duke could see her. The amber vinaigrette lay warm in Rowena's reticule, waiting. For the first time since the interval, she did not reach for it. 3 days after the opera, Rowena Peverell stood before a small altar with a man whose name had once sounded like a warning, and tried to understand how swiftly a life could be rearranged without ever becoming simple. The special license had arrived the previous afternoon, sealed and witnessed, with all the quiet efficiency a dukedom could command. His Grace's solicitor had visited Peverell House with the marriage settlement, and Rowena had read every line, while Mrs. Veilchurch sat beside her with smelling salts unopened in her lap. The terms were generous, but not decorative. Pin money settled in her own name. A jointure sufficient to protect her if widowhood came. No clause that made her family debt his excuse for possession. No hidden language that turned gratitude into obedience. When Rowena had looked up from the papers, Roland Westgrave had not been present to watch her decide. That absence, more than any provision, had told her something. He had given her room to refuse. She had not refused. Now the chapel smelled faintly of beeswax, cold stone, and lilies placed there by some efficient hand that had mistaken legality for celebration. Rowena wore a pale gown of simple muslin, carefully pressed, without veil or orange blossom. She had not wanted the costume of a bride, when the role itself felt borrowed from a life that had burned behind her in public. Her mother's amber vinaigrette rested in her reticule, beside the returned betrothal ring, the black ribbon, and Quentin's opera program, all folded away like small witnesses that had not yet been called to speak. Mrs. Veilchurch stood behind her, pale but composed. Two sober witnesses from the Duke's household waited near the vestry. There was no Christabel, no Quentin, no smiling relations, no crowd of Mayfair women measuring the distance between pity and envy. Only Roland at her side, dressed in dark mourning clothes, his profile stern beneath the thin wash of chapel light. He had not looked at her as though he had won something. He had not looked away as though he regretted what was about to occur. When the clergyman asked the necessary questions, Roland's voice answered with a steadiness that seemed to enter the floor beneath them. Rowena's own voice came quieter, but it did not fail. She heard herself promise things that would have terrified her had he demanded them. He did not demand. He simply stood near enough that the silence beside her was no longer empty. At the register table, the clergyman turned the book and offered the pen. Rowena removed one glove. The air touched her bare fingers coolly. She signed Lady Rowena Peverell for the last time. Each letter formed with deliberate care, as if the hand that had been publicly rejected could still write itself into the world. Then Roland reached for the pen. Their fingers brushed over the polished handle. It was accidental. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. Yet both of them paused. The chapel around them seemed to narrow to that small point of contact, skin near skin, breath caught and released with discipline. Rowena saw his hand clearly for the first time, strong, controlled, with a faint stiffness in the smallest finger that did not match the rest of him. He withdrew first, but not sharply. Not as if her touch offended, as if he knew the danger of taking meaning too soon. "Forgive me," he said under his breath. The clergyman was arranging the sand shaker and did not appear to hear. Rowena looked at him. "There is nothing to forgive." "Not yet," he said, so quietly that it might have been meant only for himself. Then he signed his name, Roland Westgrave, Duke of Halewick. The words changed hers, not on the page she had already written, but everywhere else. By noon she was no longer Lady Rowena Peverell in any meaningful social sense. By the time the carriage turned toward Halewick House, she was Her Grace, the Duchess of Halewick, and the title sat upon her shoulders like a cloak lined with both velvet and iron. London had already begun to feed on the transformation. A boy outside a print shop held up a fresh scandal sheet, before the ink could possibly be dry enough to justify its confidence. Rowena glimpsed only a portion as the carriage passed. Opera bride becomes duchess before the ink dries. She looked away before her aunt could see that the words had struck. Roland saw anyway. He sat opposite her, one gloved hand resting on the silver head of his cane, his face turned slightly toward the window. "They are quick," she said. "They are rarely accurate. That has never stopped them from being believed." No, his answer was blunt, but not cruel. Rowena appreciated that more than comfort. Comfort often asked her to pretend. The carriage wheels rolled over clean Mayfair stones. She had traveled these streets her entire life and never felt so visible within them. "Will you issue a denial?" she asked. "Not without your consent." She looked back at him. Most men would not ask. Most men are too fond of hearing themselves solve what they do not understand. It was the first thing he had said that held the shape of dry humor. It vanished quickly, but Rowena had seen it. "No." The honesty startled her. "I understand that Mr. Loxham arranged more than an awkward return of a ring. I understand that Lady Christabel was neither surprised nor distressed. I understand that Lady Mariscombe spoke as if she had been waiting for the result, but I do not yet understand why." Rowena's fingers tightened around her reticule. Because I was useful until I was not. Roland's gaze moved to her hand, then back to her face. That is what they wished you to believe. It may also be true. Useful things are often undervalued by those who would be helpless without them. The words were not soft, but they landed gently. Rowena turned her face toward the window before he could see too much. Halewick House stood in a broad Mayfair square behind iron railings and a fanlight bright enough to make every window seem awake. It was not showy in the way newer money tried to be. It had the older confidence of stone that had watched generations come and go, unimpressed by all of them. A footman opened the carriage door. Roland stepped down first, then turned back. He offered his hand to assist her, as propriety required. Rowena placed her gloved fingers upon his, briefly and lightly. It was not the same as the accidental brush in the chapel. This contact belonged to the world, witnessed by servants, framed by rank. Still, he did not tighten his grip. He steadied only as much as she needed. In the entrance hall, the servants stood assembled. Housekeeper, butler, footman, maids, all arranged beneath portraits of Westgrave ancestors, whose painted eyes seemed prepared to disapprove of any woman who arrived under unusual circumstances. Rowena felt the old pressure rise, the need to be pleasing, the need to justify herself before anyone accused her. She did neither. Roland stepped to her side, not in front of her. "This is Her Grace, the Duchess of Halewick," he said. "You will offer her the respect due to her position and the consideration due to a lady entering a strange house after a difficult week." A murmur of acknowledgement passed through the servants. Rowena heard the second half of his instruction more sharply than the first. Not only rank, consideration. The housekeeper, Mrs. Barrow, curtsied. Her eyes were intelligent, guarded, and not unkind. "Your Grace, your rooms are prepared." Rowena inclined her head. "Thank you, Mrs. Barrow." A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face at being named so quickly. Small things mattered in a house full of watchers. Roland led Rowena up the staircase himself, though he kept enough distance that no servant could mistake the escort for intimacy. At the end of the east corridor, Mrs. Barrow opened double doors into a suite, warmed by pale wallpaper, polished walnut, and tall windows overlooking the rear garden. The rooms were beautiful, without pressing beauty upon her. A sitting room, a bedchamber beyond, a dressing room, and through a pair of glass doors, a small conservatory joined to the side of the suite like a secret breath. Bitter orange blossoms filled the warm air beyond the glass. On a narrow shelf, several amber bottles stood in the sunlight, their colors deep as honey. Rowena stopped before she meant to. Roland noticed. He always noticed. "If the conservatory displeases you, it can be altered." "No," she said too quickly. "It is only unexpected. My sister found the main rooms of this house oppressive when she was younger. She preferred light, glass, and growing things. I thought you might prefer a place with air." His sister again. The unnamed woman behind the locked door of his explanation. Rowena looked at the amber bottles, then down at the reticule in her hand. "You thought of this before I arrived. I gave instructions after you accepted. That was very little time." "Enough." Mrs. Barrow placed a ring of household keys on a small table near the window. "Temporary keys, Your Grace, until you are ready for the full household set." Temporary, not symbolic conquest, not the keys to a prison, though they gleamed heavily enough to become either. Rowena touched them, but did not lift them. "I will learn what each one opens before I carry them." "A wise policy," Roland said. There was something in his tone that made Mrs. Barrow glanced down to hide an expression perilously close to approval when the housekeeper withdrew, leaving the door open in proper discretion. Rowena and Roland remained in the sitting room, with several feet between them and a marriage newly made around them. The distance felt necessary. It also felt suddenly full of things unsaid. "These are your rooms," he said. "No one enters without your permission. Not servants beyond household necessity. Not relations. Not I." Rowena did not say that. "I do. Because I am afraid. Because you are my wife." The word wife moved through the room with astonishing quiet. He seemed to hear it too. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and because the law gives men many rights that honor should forbid them to use without tenderness. Rowena had prepared herself for coldness, for formality, for a bargain laid like a ledger between them. She had not prepared for a feared duke to speak of honor as restraint. "You are unlike your reputation," she said. "No," he answered. "My reputation is accurate. It is merely incomplete." The faintest breath of a laugh almost escaped her. Almost. Instead, she looked toward the conservatory and the amber light caught in glass. "Then I suppose I must learn the rest." "Only what you wish to learn." Below, somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. A carriage rattled past in the square. London continued outside, curious and cruel. But for the length of one suspended moment, Rowena stood in a room where no one asked her to hide, faint, explain, or forgive. Roland turned to leave. At the threshold, he paused. "The program remains with my solicitor for examination. The ring and ribbon remain yours unless you choose otherwise." She had not asked. He had told her because objects remembered, and because she had the right to know where memory was kept. "Thank you," she said. He bowed, formal once more. "Rest if you can, Your Grace." After he left, Rowena walked into the conservatory. The orange blossoms were small and white, their fragrance clean rather than heavy. She opened her reticule and touched the amber vinaigrette inside. For the first time, she wondered whether it had steadied her because of the scent, or because it had reminded her that someone once believed she could endure. On the table beside the keys, a folded scandal sheet waited, brought in with the morning tray and not yet removed. The headline stared upward in ugly black letters. "Opera bride becomes duchess before the ink dries." Rowena looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned it face down, lifted the temporary keys, and let their weight settle into her hand. By the fourth morning of her marriage, Rowena understood that Halewick House did not wake like Peverell House. Peverell House had stirred cautiously, with servants listening for quarrels and relatives measuring one another's moods before breakfast. Halewick House opened its eyes with discipline. Fires were laid before dawn. Silver appeared without clatter. Footsteps crossed corridors and vanished before they became intrusion. Even the clocks seemed to strike with restraint. Yet beneath that order, Rowena felt curiosity moving through the house like a draught beneath a closed door. She was the Duchess now. She possessed the temporary household keys, which lay beside her plate in the morning room because she had spent the early hour learning what 3 of them opened and refusing to carry the rest as decoration. She had turned the scandal sheet face down the previous day, but turning paper did not turn London. The city had read enough to begin inventing what it did not know. When Mrs. Barrow entered with the salver of calling cards, her composed face told Rowena that the invention had arrived in person. Lady Mariscombe, Lady Tukes, Mrs. Armitage, and Lady Christabel Peverell, Your Grace. The title still struck oddly, though Rowena had learned not to flinch from it. Already. They are in the front drawing-room. Lady Mariscombe said she feared a later hour might find your grace fatigued by callers. The insult was dressed in concern, so neat it almost admired itself. Rowena set down her teacup. Across the table, Roland looked up from a letter. He had joined her for breakfast with the same formal courtesy he brought to every room, but he had not forced conversation. That restraint had become, in 3 days, a strange kind of shelter. "You are not obliged to receive them," he said. Rowena glanced at the salver. Christabel's card lay slightly above the others, as if even pasteboard could compete for precedence. "If I do not, Lady Mariscombe will say, I am too ashamed to be seen. If you do, she will attempt to make you ashamed while being seen. Then at least she will be required to work for it." A brief stillness touched his face. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. "Would you prefer that I remain?" "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the ease of the answer. Then she corrected it before fear could soften it. "But not because I need you to speak for me." I understood. He folded his letter and rose, no pledge, no dramatic vow. Only understanding, which was far more difficult to doubt. The front drawing-room had been chosen by some Westgrave ancestor, who believed chairs should encourage posture rather than comfort. Sunlight fell through tall windows onto pale carpets, silver-framed mirrors, and blue porcelain bowls filled with forced hyacinths. Lady Mariscombe sat as if the room had been lent to her. She was a handsome woman of uncertain age, with a mouth trained to smile just before it wounded. Lady Tukes and Mrs. Armitage flanked her like witnesses, prepared to swear they had merely come for tea. Christabel stood near the mantel in a gown of delicate primrose muslin, the colour of innocence advertised too loudly. "Dear Rowena," Christabel said, moving forward. "Or must I say your grace now, even in family affection?" Rowena crossed the room at an unhurried pace. In family affection, accuracy is still possible. Lady Tukes coughed into her glove. Lady Mariscombe's eyes sharpened with pleasure. Roland entered behind Rowena, not at her shoulder, not ahead of her, but far enough to be visible without claiming the center of the room. Every woman present adjusted herself by a fraction. A duke did not need to raise his voice to rearrange furniture. "Your Grace," Lady Mariscombe said, dipping into a graceful curtsy. "How kind to receive us so soon after your sudden elevation." Rowena sat. "I was told you feared I might be fatigued later." Naturally, such swift happiness must be exhausting. Christabel lowered her lashes. "We have all been so concerned." "Concern has become very active in London," Rowena said. It cooled before noon. Roland took a chair near the window. His silence was deliberate. Rowena felt it, not as absence, but as permission. Lady Mariscombe accepted tea and left it untouched. You must forgive the world its curiosity. A broken engagement, a public escort, a special license, and a duchess made before society could even send proper congratulations. It is the sort of sequence that invites interpretation. "A more honest sequence is shorter," Rowena said. "A gentleman returned my ring in a public theatre. His Grace escorted me out when everyone else chose to stare." Christabel's fingers tightened around her reticule. "Quentin was in great distress. He felt your manner with his Grace had been difficult to explain." The room chilled. Rowena rested her hands in her lap, the temporary keys absent by choice. She would not bring household authority to a conversation about personal injury. "My manner with his Grace began after Quentin returned my ring. Time can become confused in painful moments," Lady Mariscombe said smoothly, "especially for ladies of strong feeling. Then it is fortunate so many people were watching." Lady Tukes looked down at her tea. Mrs. Armitage looked at Roland, perhaps hoping he would growl and make the matter satisfyingly masculine. He did not. Lady Mariscombe leaned back. There is also the unfortunate question of the opera corridor. Rowena heard the words before she understood them. What corridor? My dear Duchess, you need not look alarmed. These matters are often exaggerated. A servant at the theatre believed he saw you near the private passage leading toward his Grace's box before the interval. It may be nothing. Servants misunderstand what they see, Christabel murmured. I told Lady Mariscombe it could not be so. Rowena is far too careful. Far too careful. Not innocent. Careful. Rowena felt the small mechanism of the accusation click into place. If she denied it too strongly, she appeared defensive. If she dismissed it, she appeared arrogant. If Roland defended her, she appeared dependent upon rank to silence truth. She took one breath. A servant is mistaken. Lady Mariscombe's smile did not move. Perhaps. But when an abandoned lady emerges almost immediately under the protection of the very Duke whose corridor she was said to have approached, people will wonder whether abandonment came before opportunity or after it. Mrs. Armitage whispered, "How dreadful," with the eager grief of a woman collecting phrases for later. Roland's hand, resting on the arm of his chair, went still. Rowena sensed the force in him gathering. For a heartbeat, she wanted him to unleash it. She wanted his title to strike the room so hard that every lifted brow shattered. Then she remembered the opera corridor, the invented sighting, the way Quentin had already turned rescue into guilt. If Roland crushed this conversation for her, Lady Mariscombe would only call it proof that he had something to hide. Rowena spoke before he could. Lady Mariscombe, a woman abandoned publicly need not apologize for standing upright. Silence. Not complete, but enough. The hyacinths on the table seemed suddenly too sweet. Lady Mariscombe's eyes narrowed by the smallest degree. Christabel looked at Rowena as if an obedient chair had answered back. Of course not, Lady Mariscombe said. No one suggests apology. Then I shall not offer one. Roland looked at her then. His expression did not change. But something in his gaze warmed with approval, so controlled it could not embarrass her. It steadied her more than the amber vinaigrette resting upstairs in her reticule. Lady Tukes set down her cup with a tiny click. Still, society values clarity. Society values a spectacle, Rowena said. Clarity is what it requests afterward to make the spectacle seem moral. The words were sharper than she had intended. They were also true. Lady Mariscombe rose. The others followed, grateful, perhaps to leave with their dignity less certain than when they entered. Your Grace is unexpectedly philosophical. No, Rowena replied. Only recently educated. Christabel came last. At the door, she paused and let her voice fall into cousinly softness. I hope you will not make an enemy of everyone who pities you. Rowena met her eyes. Pity is not always innocent. For the first time, Christabel had no ready answer. When the visitors had gone and the door closed behind their skirts, the room seemed to exhale. Rowena remained seated because standing too quickly would reveal that her knees had begun to understand what her voice had refused. Roland crossed to the bell pull, rang once, and instructed the footman who appeared, "Send Mr. Vale, my steward, to me at once. He is to obtain the King's theatre box records, counterfoils for private passages, the servants' duty list for the night of the opera, and the name of the man who claims to have seen her Grace." The footman bowed and withdrew. Rowena turned toward him. You believe the corridor story is prepared? Yes. You did not say so while they were here. You were speaking. The answer should not have affected her. It did. In Peverell House, women spoke until a man decided the useful portion had ended. Here, the most feared Duke in London had kept silent because she had not yielded the floor. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me for recognizing what is yours. My voice, your ground." She looked away first. The conversation had become too quiet, too exact. It touched places she had not armored. On the table, Lady Mariscombe's untouched tea had gone cold. "What if the servant swears to it?" she asked. "Then we discover who paid him, frightened him, or instructed him. And if he truly believes he saw me, then someone made another woman look enough like you from a distance to damage you." Rowena thought of Christabel handling her cloak before the performance, fussing over the hood, saying the shade was too dark for Rowena's complexion. A memory, small and sour, slid into place. "My cousin touched my opera cloak that night." Roland's eyes sharpened. "When?" "Before we left Peverell House," she said. The clasp was crooked. He did not pounce on the detail. He held it carefully, as if careless handling might bruise the truth before it ripened into proof. "That may matter." Rowena looked toward the window, where London moved beyond the glass, pretending innocence in broad daylight. Everything seems to matter after one has been accused. Roland stood beside the mantel, a dark figure against the pale room. Not everything, only what can be made to remember. The echo of his words from the opera moved between them. Objects remember what mouths deny. This time Rowena understood the beginning of it. Not the whole, not yet, but enough to know that the ring, the ribbon, and the program were no longer relics of humiliation. They were witnesses waiting their turn. That evening, just before dusk, Mr. Vale returned with a sealed packet and a troubled face. Rowena was in the morning room with the household keys spread before her, learning the difference between linen press, plate room, and still room. When Roland entered, without his usual unreadable calm, he stopped at the threshold, as he had promised never to enter her space without notice, though the door stood open. "May I come in?" he asked. "Yes." Mr. Vale remained behind him. Roland held a copied page in his hand. "There is an entry in the private corridor list from the night of the opera." Rowena set down the smallest key. It rang softly against the table. "With my name?" "Yes." He crossed the room and placed the page before her without touching her chair, her hand, or the keys, and the time recorded is before the interval. Rowena read her own name in a place she had never been, written in another person's hand, and felt the house around her grow very still. Somewhere in London, a lie had learned to write. The copied corridor entry lay on the morning room table for most of the following day, not because Rowena wished to stare at her own name in a stranger's hand, but because hiding it felt too much like surrender. She placed it beside the household keys, the linen book, and Mrs. Barrow's list of weekly accounts, allowing the lie to sit among the ordinary instruments of her new life. It was astonishing how quickly a woman could be expected to become two things at once. By breakfast, London had begun to wonder whether she had pursued a duke through a private passage. By noon, the housekeeper needed her decision on whether the West guest rooms should be opened for callers who might never be invited. By 2 o'clock, the cook required approval for dinner changes because Lady Mariscombe's card had unsettled the entire servants' hall. Rowena answered each question with care. She learned that the smallest key opened the still-room cupboard, that the long brass one belonged to the plate safe, and that Mrs. Barrow respected exact instructions more than nervous apologies. She also learned that the household was watching not to mock her, but to decide what sort of mistress had arrived beneath the scandal. That distinction mattered. It did not make the scrutiny painless. Near the 3rd hour after luncheon, a young maid named Polly entered with a tray of freshly sorted calling cards and promptly dropped half of them across the carpet. The poor girl froze as if she had broken porcelain rather than scattered pasteboard. "I'm sorry, Your Grace. I didn't mean to." Mrs. Barrow said they were to be arranged by precedence, and I thought I had them. But Lady Tukes's card slipped, and then I couldn't catch the others. Her face had gone white. A footman near the door looked as if he wished himself part of the wallpaper. Rowena saw at once what the girl feared. In a house this disciplined, mistakes looked louder than they were. In a scandal, every mistake seemed contagious. Rowena knelt before anyone could stop her and gathered the nearest cards. The movement shocked the room into silence. A duchess did not kneel on her own carpet to collect calling cards. A woman who had been abandoned before all Mayfair was expected to defend dignity as if it were glass. Rowena picked up Lady Mariscombe's card and turned it over. "This one may go at the bottom," she said. Polly blinked. The footman made a strangled sound that might have been a cough. From the open doorway, where Roland Westgrave had appeared without announcing himself, no sound came at all. Rowena continued sorting. Lady Tukes before Mrs. Armitage, Lady Mariscombe before everyone by force of will, though not by my preference. My cousin may remain wherever she fell. Polly's mouth trembled toward a smile, then steadied in relief. "Yes, Your Grace. There. Now you have learned more from the accident than from carrying them perfectly. Do not let fear make your hands clumsier than the cards deserve." The maid curtsied with gratitude, so plain it nearly undid Rowena, more than insult would have done. After Polly withdrew, Rowena rose and found Roland watching her from the threshold. He did not praise her. She was beginning to understand that praise, from him, rarely arrived, dressed as praise. "You have made an ally in the lower hall," he said. "I have rescued several cards from disgrace. I did not expect political consequence. Houses are governed by smaller loyalties than Parliament imagines. Then I shall remember not to offend the pasteboard." This time he almost smiled. It was brief, a mere alteration near the eyes, but it changed his whole face before discipline reclaimed it. Rowena felt the effect of that almost smile with embarrassing clarity. It was not gratitude. It was not safety. It was the unsettling awareness that the man she had married possessed warmth he kept locked away, and some foolish part of her wished to see the key turn again. "Mr. Vale has gone again to the theatre," Roland said, crossing only as far as the writing table. "The porter's full statement will be taken this evening." Rowena looked back at the copied entry. "Does he still insist he saw me?" "He insists he saw a lady in a dark opera cloak near the passage. That is less than my name. It became your name after someone wrote it into the list. Lady Mariscombe, perhaps, or someone under her protection." Rowena touched the edge of the copy. The paper was smooth, innocent of the damage it carried. "My cousin handled my cloak before we left for the opera. She said the clasp was crooked. I remember you said so. It seemed too small to matter. Small things are often chosen because decent people are embarrassed to accuse them of consequence." His voice was calm, but something in it had tightened. Rowena glanced up. He was looking not at the paper, but at her hand. Only then did she realize her fingers were trembling. The tremor had begun without her permission. A tiny betrayal. She withdrew her hand at once and reached into the reticule, resting beside the ledger. The amber vinaigrette slipped against her glove. She could open it. She could breathe the sharp scent and command herself back into steadiness. Her thumb found the silver cap, but the cap caught. The harder she tried, the more her hand shook. Heat rose behind her eyes. Not tears, anger. She had stood through opera glasses, scandal sheets, false entries, and smiling enemies, only to be defeated by a small silver hinge. Roland did not move at first. That restraint gave her 1 second to recover. Then he said quietly, "May I?" The words reached her before his hand did. She looked at him. He stood close enough now that she could see the faint white line of the scar near his temple and the careful stillness in his right hand, as if he had trained even concern to wait for permission. "It is only stuck," she said. "I know, I can manage it. I know that as well." The answer left her nowhere to hide. Slowly, she extended the vinaigrette. Roland did not take it from her. Instead, he placed his fingers lightly over the silver cap while she held the amber glass. His touch was precise, warm through the thin edge of her glove, and so careful that it made her breath catch more than a bolder gesture would have done. He turned the cap with a small motion. It opened. The sharp, clean scent rose between them. Rowena inhaled, her hand steadied, but neither of them moved for the space of 2 heartbeats. This was not the accidental brush at the register. This was chosen, asked aloud. The realization entered quietly and would not leave. Roland withdrew first, as always, but his gaze remained on her face. "My sister carried a scent bottle for nearly a year," he said. Rowena closed her fingers around the vinaigrette. "The woman you mentioned before?" "Yes." The single word carried more weight than explanation. He looked toward the window, where spring light lay coldly over the square. "She was younger than you are now. Too trusting for a city that rewards practiced cruelty." There was an evening at the opera, a corridor, a promise of a private word from someone she believed honorable. Rowena stilled. Was she harmed? Not in the way society would have required in order to believe her injured. The bitterness in his voice was quiet enough to be more frightening than anger, but she was frightened and nearly ruined. Rowena thought of the false corridor entry of her own name written where she had never gone. What stopped it? His fingers flexed once against the edge of the writing table. The smallest finger did not move as smoothly as the others. Someone sent warning in time. A young woman with more courage than caution, though I did not know her name. Rowena absorbed that slowly. The theater, a corridor, a young woman nearly ruined, a warning. And you blame yourself because you were not the one who stopped it. He looked back at her then. Few people, she suspected, spoke to the Duke of Halewick so plainly. Fewer survived his silence afterward. But his silence did not punish her. It opened just a little. "I was her brother," he said. "I should have seen danger before a stranger did. Brothers are not gods, Your Grace." "No. But young sisters often believe they are." The words were so stark that Rowena felt the wound beneath them, not displayed, not offered for sympathy, simply present. She understood, suddenly, why his protection felt like a blade kept always sharpened. He had once arrived too late to prevent terror and had spent years cutting down every threat before it could show its face. "Did she recover?" Rowena asked. "Yes, in time." "And the person who warned her vanished." His gaze dropped briefly to the amber vinaigrette, until perhaps she did not. Rowena did not understand the sentence, not fully. Before she could ask, a knock sounded. The butler entered with a folded note on a tray, his expression restrained in a way that announced trouble. "From Mr. Vale, Your Grace, sent from the King's Theatre." Roland opened it. His face did not change, but the room seemed to lose warmth. "The porter has expanded his claim," he said. Rowena set the vinaigrette down. "Open now. It's scent clear and steady between them." "Expanded it how?" Roland handed her the note, rather than summarizing first. She read the words once, then again. The porter now claimed he had seen her enter the Duke's corridor before the interval, wearing a dark cloak and carrying something amber in her hand. Rowena's fingers went cold around the paper. Whoever had written her name into a corridor had now placed her mother's object there as well. Roland's voice was low when he spoke. "This is no longer gossip." Rowena looked at the amber bottle on the table, the same one she had carried since girlhood, the same one Roland had just helped her open with such careful permission. "No," she said. "It is a rehearsal." His eyes met hers. For what? The answer formed before she wanted it. For a public accusation. The note from Mr. Vale did not leave the morning room when the butler withdrew. Like the copied corridor entry before it, the porter's expanded claim remained on the table, placed beside the amber vinaigrette, now open and innocent in the light. Rowena read the words once more, though she already knew them too well. A lady in a dark cloak. A private corridor. Something amber in her hand. Her name had first been written into a place she had never entered. Now the lie had learned to carry her mother's keepsake. That frightened her more than she wished Roland to see. It meant whoever shaped this accusation understood that objects carried more power than denial. A woman might protest and be called hysterical. A servant might recant and be called pressured. But a familiar object, described before witnesses, became a hook in the public mind. People would imagine the amber bottle in her hand before they imagined her innocence. Roland stood near the hearth with Mr. Vale's second note in his hand, his expression controlled so perfectly that only the stillness gave him away. "The porter gave this statement freely?" Rowena asked. "Freely enough to be dangerous," Roland said. "Mr. Vale believes the man was frightened before he was paid." Frightened by whom? He would not say. Then he did not give a statement. He gave a performance. Roland looked at her, and the sharp approval she had seen once before flickered again. "Yes." Rowena closed the vinaigrette and set it down. The small click of the silver cap sounded louder than it ought to have done. "May I see the opera program again?" "It is with my solicitor." "Then send for it." He did not hesitate. He rang, gave the order, and returned to the table without remarking that the program had technically been in his solicitor's keeping. He had promised it remained hers. He remembered that mattered more than she wanted it to. Within the hour, the folded program lay before them, brought in a sealed packet and opened only after Rowena nodded. The paper looked less dramatic by daylight. Merely cream stock, printed names, a faint crease from Quentin's hand or the footman's, and the narrow slit through which the ring had been fastened. The returned betrothal ring remained in Rowena's reticule, still tied with the black ribbon. She took it out and placed it beside the program. Roland's gaze moved to the ribbon. "That scent has not faded." "Violet," Rowena said. "Heavy violet. Christabel used it often enough to make entire rooms remember her after she left. Not yours." "No, mine is sharper. Amber and herbs." She paused. If the porter described something amber, he was told to say it. He did not smell it from across a corridor. Agreed. But if he was told to say it, someone knew I carried it. Many people at the theatre may have seen it fall. Yes. She looked down at the black ribbon. But the statement says he saw it before the interval, before it fell. Roland's hand stilled on the table. It was the smallest movement, Its absence struck harder. Rowena leaned closer to the program, careful not to touch the slit. The ring was already tied before the footman brought it. The ribbon was already scented. Someone prepared this before I dropped the vinaigrette. And before I retrieved it, Roland said. The words settled between them. It was not comfort, it was structure. A lie had a sequence, and sequence could be broken. Rowena looked toward the windows, where the afternoon light lay pale across the carpet. Christabel handled my opera cloak before we left Peverell House. She stood close enough to see the reticule. She might have seen the vinaigrette when I placed my gloves inside. And Mr. Loxam had the program prepared, or allowed it to be prepared. He is not clever enough to be innocent by stupidity alone. The line was so dry that Rowena almost smiled, almost. The moment passed when a second note arrived, not through servants' gossip this time, but under Lady Mariscombe's seal. Mrs. Barrow brought it herself, her composed face sharpened by disapproval. For her grace. Rowena broke the seal. The invitation was written in a hand that made malice look educated. Lady Mariscombe requested the honor of her grace's presence at a small salon of concerned patronesses, convened to clarify the unfortunate misunderstandings surrounding the King's Theatre incident. There would be tea. There would be sympathy. There would be knives, though Lady Mariscombe had not written that part. Rowena read the final line aloud. Her grace may attend if she is not afraid of the truth. The room went quiet. Roland held out his hand, not to take the letter from her, but to receive it if she chose. She passed it to him. He read it once, then folded it precisely. The words landed flat, not cruel. Worse, certain. Rowena turned slowly. I beg your pardon. Lady Mariscombe is not requesting truth. She is arranging a social tribunal with teacups. Yes, then you will not give her the satisfaction. If I do not attend, she will say absence is confession. Let her speak. I can stop the worst of it. Can you? His expression hardened. Yes, there it was. The feared Duke. The man who could write one letter and close half the doors in London. For an instant, Rowena understood why society feared him, and why frightened people might mistake that fear for safety. But her name, once written into a false corridor, could not be erased by a husband's command without leaving another mark beneath it. No, she said. Roland's gaze sharpened. No, no, Your Grace. I will not be hidden, because Lady Mariscombe has arranged a trap. It is because she has arranged a trap that you should not enter it. If a trap is set in my name, my absence does not spring it. It only allows others to describe how I would have looked inside. He was silent. She saw the restraint in his jaw, the effort he made not to answer too quickly. It should have pleased her. Instead, it made the distance between them feel newly fragile. You believe I cannot endure it, she said. I believe no innocent person should be made to endure it. That is not the same thing. It becomes the same in practice. Only if you decide practice without me. The words struck him. She saw it. Not because he flinched, but because he became even stiller. Rowena placed one palm flat upon the table beside the program, the ring and the ribbon. Last week, Quentin returned this ring before witnesses because he wanted the first version of the story to belong to him. This week, Lady Mariscombe wishes to gather patronesses, so the second version belongs to her. If I stay in this house while you silence them, the third version will be that the Duke of Halewick shut his new wife away because even he could not defend her in open company. I would defend you anywhere. Then defend me beside me, not instead of me. The quiet after that sentence filled the room, completely. Mrs. Barrow lowered her eyes and made a discreet retreat without being asked. Somewhere in the corridor, a footman's steps faded. Roland looked at Rowena across the table, as if she had placed evidence before him that he had not expected to find and could not dismiss. You speak as if you have spent years preparing to be disbelieved. Most women have, though we are encouraged to call it manners. His face changed then. The anger did not leave, but it turned away from her, toward the invisible architecture that had made her answer true. I do not wish you wounded again. The admission was quiet, too quiet for command. Rowena's fingers loosened. I know. No, he said. You know that I am capable of preventing scenes. You do not know what I become when I fail to prevent them. The words opened a door he had not meant to open fully. She saw the unnamed sister again in the space between them. The opera corridor, the warning from a stranger, the scent bottle carried for a year. She wanted to ask. She did not. He had not offered that story yet, and she had learned the value of not forcing locked doors. Then, do not fail in the same way, she said gently. Do not make my safety look like my guilt. Roland looked down at the program. The slit in the paper was narrow, almost neat. An ugly thing done with careful hands. If you attend, Lady Mariscombe will not begin with accusation. She will begin with concern. She will let others do the cutting while she holds the cloth. Then I must bring more than my pride. You have the program, and the ring, and the ribbon. Not yet enough. No, Rowena agreed, but enough to ask questions. He glanced at her. Questions can be dangerous. So can silence. The smallest shadow of rue crossed his face, there and gone. You are determined. I am tired of being described by people who profit from my absence. He walked to the window and stood there a moment, his hands clasped behind him. The old scar near his temple showed pale against the daylight. When he turned back, his voice had returned to its formal control, but not its earlier certainty. Then we will prepare. Rowena breathed in slowly. The room seemed to release her. We? I said I would defend you beside you. You also said I would not attend. I was wrong. It was so plainly spoken that she had no answer ready. Men of rank rarely surrendered even small errors without first surrounding them in explanation. Roland did not. He returned to the table and touched the corner of the program. Careful not to disturb the slit. We need the porter's exact wording, the duty list, the box counterfoils, and the original register if we can reach it. We need to know who wrote your name, and whether the ink differs from the rest. Rowena looked at the ribbon. We need to know who handled the ring before it reached the footman. Yes, and whether Christabel's maid had access to Quentin's box. Mr. Vale can discover that. The name of her cousin sat between them like perfume too heavy to disperse. Rowena picked up the black ribbon and held it near enough to catch the scent again. Violet, sweet, clinging, theatrical. Christabel used to say violet made people remember her. Then perhaps, Roland said, she has been remembered too well. A dangerous warmth moved through Rowena at the quiet edge in his voice. Not triumph, not romance, not yet. Something more unsettling. The sense of being believed before she had completed her proof. She set down the ribbon. I will attend Lady Mariscombe's salon. Yes, I will not weep. If you do, it will not make you guilty. The answer struck so unexpectedly that she looked away. Her eyes burned for one foolish second. She forced the feeling down, not because he had caused it, but because kindness at the wrong moment could undo what cruelty had failed to break. Roland seemed to understand. He did not come closer. He did not reach for her. The planned intimacy of Part 5 remained behind them, singular and unclaimed by repetition. Here, Distance was the respect required. By dusk, the household had shifted into quiet motion. Mr. Vale was dispatched again to the King's Theatre. A note went to the Duke's solicitor. Mrs. Barrow arranged the carriage for Lady Mariscombe's salon 2 days hence, and asked no unnecessary questions. Rowena returned the ring, the ribbon, and the programme to a locked drawer in her sitting room, keeping the key on the table beside the others until she had learned its shape by touch. When the lamps were lit, a final message came from Mr. Vale. The porter would hold to his statement. He now claimed, with growing confidence, that the lady he saw had worn a dark cloak and carried amber. Rowena read the line aloud without shaking. Roland stood across from her, the lamplight catching the severe line of his face. "He is no longer remembering," she said. "He is rehearsing." "For Lady Mariscombe's room," Roland answered. Rowena folded the note once, precisely. Outside, London settled into evening, polishing its gossip for the next day. Inside Halewick House, the false corridor waited like a stage not yet lit, and for the first time since the opera, Rowena understood that the next performance would require her to walk toward the accusation, not away from it. Lady Mariscombe's salon had been arranged to resemble Mercy. That was the first danger. Rowena noticed when she entered 2 days later beneath the pale afternoon light of Grosvenor Street. No one had chosen a grand ballroom or a formal committee room where accusation would have worn its true face. Instead, Lady Mariscombe had filled a long drawing room with low tables, porcelain cups, sugared biscuits, and enough flowers to make cruelty smell like civility. Patronesses sat in soft clusters beneath painted fans and gilt mirrors, their gowns rustling like leaves before a storm. Lady Tukes leaned near Mrs. Armitage. Lady Felbrigg lifted her lorgnette and lowered it as if ashamed of her own curiosity. Near the mantel, Christabel Peverell stood in pale lavender with Quentin Loxham at her side, and the sight of them together struck Rowena less like heartbreak than insult carefully repeated. Quentin wore the expression of a man who wished to appear wounded without suffering any inconvenience from the wound. Christabel's eyes, when they found Rowena, shone with gentle concern sharpened at the edges. Roland entered beside Rowena, but he did not offer his arm once they crossed the threshold. That had been agreed in the carriage. She would not arrive as a woman being led into judgment. She would arrive as the Duchess of Halewick, and more importantly, as herself. The ring, the ribbon, and Quentin's slit opera program were not in her reticule. They remained locked in her sitting room at Halewick House, because Roland had been right that the evidence was not yet enough. Rowena carried only her amber vinaigrette, closed and cool in her gloved hand, not because she needed it, but because the lie had dared to borrow it. Lady Mariscombe came forward with both hands extended. Rowena allowed no embrace. "Your Grace," Lady Mariscombe said, rich with public warmth, "how very brave of you to come." "Bravery is not usually required for tea," Rowena replied. "Then I hope today proves ordinary." "Do you?" The smallest pause followed. Several women heard it. Lady Mariscombe smiled wider. "Naturally, we all wish for clarity. No one here desires pain." From behind her, Quentin murmured, "I should have preferred none of this." Rowena looked at him fully for the first time since the opera corridor. His face had altered in her mind. Once, she had thought him handsome in a mild, agreeable way. Now his features seemed arranged around avoidance. "Then you chose a curious method of returning a ring," she said. A faint stir moved through the room. Roland remained silent near the door, a dark figure beneath a landscape painting. his gaze not on Quentin but on Rowena, ready and withheld. She felt his restraint like a hand not placed at her back. It steadied because it did not claim. Lady Mariscombe gestured toward the chairs. "Let us all sit before the matter grows theatrical." "It began at the theatre," Rowena said, taking the seat offered to her. "We need not pretend otherwise." Christabel's smile flickered. Tea was poured. No one drank. The porter was brought in not through the main door, but from a side passage which told Rowena that Lady Mariscombe had planned the moment with more care than shame. He was a narrow-shouldered man in dark service clothes, his hair brushed too flat, his hands clasped before him. He would not meet Roland's eyes. That, more than anything, told Rowena fear had indeed been part of the purchase. Lady Mariscombe turned to the room. "This poor man has been very reluctant to speak, but as the reputation of several families is involved, silence helps no one. Mr. Nellis, you were on duty at the King's Theatre on the night in question?" "Yes, my lady." "And did you observe a lady near the private corridor that leads toward His Grace's box before the interval?" The porter swallowed. "I did. Do you see that lady here?" The room seemed to inhale. Rowena did not move. The porter's gaze flickered to Christabel, then down, then toward Rowena. "I believed it was Her Grace." "Believed, not saw." Rowena caught the word and held it. Lady Mariscombe did too, but she moved quickly. "You also observed something in her hand." "Something amber, my lady." "Like a little bottle." The amber vinaigrette lay in Rowena's palm. She did not hide it. Hiding would have made it guilty. Lady Tukes whispered, "How unfortunate." Roland shifted almost imperceptibly. Rowena sensed the force gathering in him, the instinct to cut through the room with rank and anger. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Not yet. His jaw tightened, but he obeyed the look. Lady Mariscombe opened a leather folder on the small table beside her. "There is also the subscription passage list. I regret that such records are necessary. But opera houses are complicated places, and members of rank must be protected from intrusion." She withdrew a page. "Her Grace's name appears here, entered before the interval." A murmur went through the room. Rowena saw the page from where she sat. Her name. A time. A place she had never entered. The ink seemed darker than the entries above it. The letters too fresh, too deliberate. She had noticed this before in the copy. Seeing it displayed before women prepared to believe, the worst made the lie feel newly alive. Christabel lowered her eyes. "I told Lady Mariscombe there must be some mistake." "Did you?" Rowena asked. Christabel looked up. "Of course. You're my cousin. That has not always improved my position." Quentin stepped forward. "Rowena, this is exactly why I hesitated. You must understand how matters appeared. I received word that you had been seen near His Grace's private passage. Then, when I tried to end things quietly, you emerged under his protection before the entire theatre." A sound escaped Mrs. Armitage. Not quite sympathy, not quite delight. Rowena looked at Quentin for a long moment. "You tried to end things quietly as circumstances allowed. You returned my ring through a footman in a public interval. I was distressed, too distressed to speak, but not too distressed to have the ring tied into a program." His color rose. "I didn't tie it." Silence. Not complete, but sharp. Lady Mariscombe's hand tightened on the folder. Christabel's fan stopped. Quentin seemed to realize he had given away more than he meant, for he added quickly, "I mean only that my servant prepared it." Rowena let the correction hang long enough for everyone to feel its weight. Then she asked, "If I had already secured a duke, why did you need to return my ring before witnesses?" The room stilled. Even the cups seemed to stop trembling on their saucers. Quentin opened his mouth, closed it. I wished to preserve my dignity. By destroying mine, you had already placed me in an impossible position. How? By allowing yourself to be seen. In a corridor, mister. Nellis believed he saw me enter. By making his grace's interest apparent. Roland's voice cut in then, quiet enough to be deadly. My interest was not apparent until after you abandoned her. Lady Mariscombe lifted a hand. Your grace, no one questions your honor. You are questioning my wife's. The distinction is convenient, not innocent. The words struck the room with force, but Rowena saw the danger at once. Every face turned toward Roland. If he continued, the story would become the Duke's defense, not her truth. She rose. No, your grace. The room froze at the interruption. Roland stopped immediately, not because he was pleased, because he had promised. Rowena faced Quentin again. You say you wished to preserve dignity. You say you received word that I had been seen near his grace's passage. Who gave you that word? Quentin looked toward Lady Mariscombe. Lady Mariscombe looked at her tea. Christabel stepped in before either could answer. Rowena, must you interrogate everyone? It only makes you appear more determined to turn misfortune into victory. There it was, the more elegant accusation. Not that Rowena had sinned, but that she had profited too quickly from injury. Christabel moved toward the center of the room, soft voice carrying. Everyone knows you were unhappy with Quentin's delay in setting a wedding date. Everyone knows his grace is powerful. Perhaps nothing improper occurred. Perhaps you merely encouraged attention where you should not have done. Women are sometimes clever when they are frightened of being left behind. Rowena felt the sentence travel through the salon and find every woman who had feared age, rejection, comparison, replacement. Christabel knew where to cut because she knew where women were taught to hide their wounds. Rowena's hand tightened around the vinaigrette. She did not open it. I was left behind, she said, at the opera, in full view, by a man who now calls his cruelty caution. Quentin's face hardened. I will not be made the villain because you married well. No, Rowena said. You will be made the villain only if the truth can bear the weight. Lady Mariscombe rose, reclaiming the room before Rowena could press further. Enough. I had hoped for clarity, but emotion has overtaken us. The matter remains unresolved. Her Grace denies the corridor. Mr. Nis believes he saw her. Mr. Loxham acted upon what he believed a serious impropriety. We must all be charitable until more certainty presents itself. Charitable. The word covered the room like dust. It meant society would not condemn Rowena outright. Not yet. It would merely let suspicion sit beside her at every table. Roland stepped forward at last, but only after Rowena did not stop him. Certainty will present itself, he said. And when it does, I trust every lady in this room will remember how carefully she listened today. Lady Tukes paled. Mrs. Armitage found sudden interest in her gloves. Lady Mariscombe smiled, but the smile had thinned. We all desire truth, your Grace. Then you should have no fear of its arrival. Rowena inclined her head to the room and turned to leave before anyone could dismiss her. It was a small reversal, but she felt it. She chose the moment of departure. Roland followed a pace behind until they reached the hall. Only there, away from the patroness's eyes, but still within propriety, did he come beside her. You stopped me, he said. Yes, you were right. The admission was immediate. It warmed nothing, but it steadied much. Rowena kept walking. Did you see the ink? Darker than the rest. Entered later. Likely. Likely is not proof. No. And Quentin said he did not tie the ribbon. He did. The hall opened toward the front steps. Carriages waited outside beneath a pale sky. Rowena paused before descending, holding herself together by posture alone. They will say I failed to clear myself. You were never meant to clear yourself today. The room was arranged to make uncertainty appear polite. Then they succeeded. No, Roland said. She looked at him. You made Mr. Loxham admit he did not prepare the ring himself. You made Lady Mariscombe display the register before witnesses. You made the porter say he believed, not knew. They gained suspicion. We gained cracks. We. The word moved through her more gently than comfort would have done. She wanted to rest in it, which was precisely why she could not. Not yet. At Halewick House that evening, Roland obtained a private copy of the displayed register page. Through Mr. Vale's earlier arrangement with a clerk who owed the Westgrave household a favour, the copy was laid beside the corridor entry in Rowena's sitting room. No ring, no ribbon, no programme left their locked drawer. The objects remained where they belonged. Rowena stood beside the table, studying the names until the letters blurred. The ink beside her name looked darker because it was darker. The hand was careful because it was imitating official habit. A lie had tried to dress itself as record. Roland stood across from her, silent while she looked. He did not urge rest. He did not command patience. At last, Rowena touched the edge of the copy. Someone wrote this after the others dried. Yes, then someone had access to the register after the opera began. Yes, Lady Mariscombe's household. Perhaps. Christabel's maid. Perhaps. You dislike saying perhaps. I dislike not yet having proof. Rowena looked down at her copied name, dark and false, among the legitimate entries. Then let us find who held the pen. Outside, night settled over Mayfair. Somewhere, not far away, Lady Mariscombe was likely telling friends that the new Duchess had shown spirit but not innocence. Quentin was probably rehearsing injury. Christabel was perhaps touching violet perfume to her wrists and smiling at the thought of being remembered. Rowena closed the register copy and felt, beneath exhaustion, a cleaner feeling begin to rise. Not hope. Not yet. Resolve. The first public blow had landed. She was still standing, and this time the lie had left ink behind. The next morning, Roland Westgrave did precisely what he had promised not to do, and Rowena did not learn it from him. She learned it from Mrs. Barrow's careful hesitation outside the sitting-room door, from the footman who would not meet her eyes, and finally from Polly, the young maid whose hands trembled less now when carrying cards. The girl entered with fresh linen lists and an expression too honest for household politics. Your Grace, I don't know if I should say. Rowena looked up from the copied register page, which she had been studying beside the locked drawer, where the ring, the ribbon, and the opera programme remained. Then say it plainly, Polly, and we shall decide afterward whether you should have done. Polly swallowed. Mrs. Barrow told the lower hall that her Grace is not to receive invitations for the next fortnight unless his Grace approves them first. And Lord Caversham's musicale was declined this morning, Lady Tukes's card too. The servants are saying his Grace means to keep you from being seen until the talk settles. Rowena's hand went still over the paper. In the silence that followed, the house seemed suddenly to lose its discipline and become what houses often became under pressure. A place full of doors through which decisions could pass without the person most affected ever seeing them. Polly flushed. I'm sorry, Your Grace. I shouldn't have repeated it. No, Rowena said, folding the linen list with deliberate care. You should not have been placed in a house where truth must travel through servants. Because it cannot walk through the front hall. Polly's eyes widened. Rowena softened her voice. You have done no wrong. Ask Mrs. Barrow to send his grace to me when he is at liberty. The maid curtsied and fled. Rowena stood very still after she had gone. On the table lay the evidence of public lies. The copied corridor entry, the darker subscription register name, Mr. Vale's note about the porter's rehearsal. In the locked drawer lay the returned ring, its black ribbon still scented with violet, and Quentin's slit program. Each object had been handled, preserved, and respected, yet her own life had been moved without her hand upon it. That was the insult that reached deeper than scandal. When Roland entered 10 minutes later, he paused at the threshold as he always did now. You sent for me. Yes, he read the room before she spoke. That gift, which had once felt like protection, now felt like danger. You know that my invitations have been declined before I saw them? Yes. His face closed. Temporarily. An elegant word. How long is temporary when a woman's name is under suspicion? Until I have enough proof to make Lady Mariscombe regret setting this machinery in motion. And while you assemble proof, I vanish. You recover. Do not polish the word. He crossed no farther than the edge of the carpet. Every appearance gives them another chance to wound you. Every absence gives them a chance to explain why I am hidden. I can answer that. That is precisely the problem. The words struck sharply enough that the room seemed to contract around them. Roland's jaw tightened, and Rowena saw the war inside him. The Duke who commanded, the brother who had failed once and never forgiven himself, the husband who had not yet learned that fear could dress itself as virtue. I did not intend to silence you, he said. Intentions do not carry as far as actions. I was trying to prevent another public scene. You have built me a room with velvet walls and called it safety. His expression changed. It was not anger. She could have borne anger more easily. It was recognition arriving too late. Rowena turned to the table, lifted the temporary Duchess keys, and placed them one by one upon the polished surface. The sound was small, but each key landed like a decision. Linen press, plate safe, still room, sitting room drawer, a house reduced to metal in her hand, then relinquished. Rowena, her name in his voice, nearly undid her. Not because it was tender, because it wanted to be. She took her reticule from the chair. The amber vinaigrette was inside. The ring, ribbon, and program remained locked in the drawer, and she did not touch them. They were evidence. They belonged to the investigation. Her leaving was not flight. It was boundary. I am going to my aunt's house. You are leaving Halewick House. With my maid and proper chaperonage, I shall not give Lady Mariscombe an actual impropriety, simply because she failed to invent a convincing one. This is not necessary. It is to me. He drew in a slow breath. If you go now, they will talk. They are already talking. At least now some portion of the truth will be mine. For the first time since she had known him, Roland looked uncertain. The sight should have felt like victory. It did not. It hurt. Do you think I wished to imprison you? He asked. No, I think you wished to protect me so completely that no one could see me, including myself. She did not wait for a reply. If she did, she might accept one too soon. Mrs. Barrow met her in the hall with a cloak already brought down and grief carefully hidden behind professionalism. Rowena thanked her, named the aunt's address, and entered the carriage without looking back at the tall windows of Halewick House. She had gone barely 2 streets when another carriage drew near behind hers and slowed to match its pace. Through the glass, she saw the Westgrave crest. Her chest tightened with equal parts dread and relief. The carriage halted in a quiet square bordered by plane trees just beginning to show spring green. Roland descended from his carriage and approached hers alone, without footmen crowding the moment. Her maid sat stiffly across from Rowena, eyes lowered. The door opened. Roland did not step inside. "May I speak with you?" he asked. Even now, especially now. Rowena looked at him for one heartbeat longer than courtesy required. "You may." He entered and sat opposite her, leaving the carriage door partly open until her maid's presence and the public square made propriety unmistakable. "I will not ask you to return." That was not what she had expected. "No, no, I have done enough deciding in the name of care." His gloved hands rested on his knees. One finger, the stiff one, did not lie as naturally as the others. I mistook protection for permission. The words were plain. No defense, no explanation arranged to flatter his injury. Rowena kept her voice steady. "Yes, I declined invitations because I saw the salon yesterday and imagined every room becoming that room. I thought, if I could control the doors, I could control the harm. You controlled my doors instead." "Yes." He took something from inside his coat and placed it on the carriage seat between them, a folded copy of the altered subscription register. "I should have given you this before I acted, Mr. Vale secured it last night from a clerk who admits the page was out of its usual keeping after the opera began. The original remains at the theatre, but this copy is exact enough for study." Rowena stared at the paper. He had not come empty-handed. He had not come merely with apology. He had brought back a piece of the truth he had nearly kept as his own weapon. "Why bring it to me now?" "Because you saw what I missed before." She looked up. "The ink. And the performance beneath courtesy. I am very good at finding enemies. You are better at hearing the lie before it speaks." The compliment came without ornament, which made it harder to dismiss. Rowena unfolded the copy on her lap. The false entry remained dark against the others. Her name, the time, the corridor. She studied the shape of the strokes, then the faint smudge below the line. "This mark," she said, "here, near the edge." Roland leaned forward but did not crowd her. "Ink? No, it is too pale." She tilted the page toward the carriage light. "Oil, perhaps, or perfume. Christabel's violet scent leaves a faint stain on paper if the glove is freshly touched. I have seen it on notes she handled at Peverell House. She used to laugh that fragrance was a signature no one could accuse." Roland's gaze sharpened. The ribbon carried violet, and the register may have been touched by the same glove. Then the hand that prepared the ring may have also touched the altered entry. Or the person who handled both stood close enough to the one who did. Rowena folded the page carefully. Her anger had not vanished, but it had changed shape. It had become useful. Roland watched her as if she had just opened a locked room inside his own investigation. "Rowena," he said quietly, "I am sorry. You said that. Not enough. I am sorry that I made you feel judged by the world and managed by your husband in the same week. I cannot undo the first injury. I will not repeat the second." The carriage door remained open. A breeze moved through, lifting the edge of the paper. Her aunt's house waited only a few streets away. Halewick House waited behind them, full of keys she had placed on a table and choices that needed to be remade. Roland did not reach for her. He simply placed his hand palm upward on the seat between them, an offer, nothing more. Rowena looked at it. She remembered the opera, when he had returned the vinaigrette without closing his fingers. The chapel, when their hands had brushed by accident. The morning room, when he had asked before steadying her trembling hand. This was different again. not rescue, not assistance. A request for trust after he had damaged it. Slowly, Rowena set the folded register copy aside. She placed her gloved hand in his. Roland's fingers closed with careful warmth, not possession. He did not pull her toward him. He did not speak at once. The quiet held. It was the first time she had allowed him to hold her hand, truly hold it. And the fact that she had chosen the contact made the carriage seem both smaller and safer. "I am still going to my aunt's house," she said. "I know. For today, as you choose." The phrase settled between them like a repaired seam, visible but honest. Rowena looked down at their joined hands. If Christabel scented the ribbon, she touched the ring before Quentin returned it. Yes, and if the same scent marked the register copy, then she or someone close to her touched the lie after it was written. Yes. Then tomorrow, Your Grace, we begin with her gloves. For the first time that day, Roland's mouth curved, faint and grim. "Roland," he said. Rowena looked at him. "If we are to begin again, call me Roland when there is no audience to misunderstand it." She should have refused the intimacy. Perhaps she would have, if his hand had tightened or his eyes had demanded. They did neither. "Very well," she said. Roland. His name, spoken softly in the carriage, altered the air more than any title had done. Outside, London continued to turn on rumor and wheels. Inside, Rowena kept her hand in his until the carriage reached her aunt's door. Then she withdrew first, not because she feared the touch, but because trust, once damaged, deserved to be rebuilt by choice rather than hunger. Roland accepted the loss of her hand without protest. That, too, was part of the apology. Rowena did not return to Halewick House that evening. She slept beneath her aunt's roof in a narrow bed that had known her childhood visits, with the folded copy of the altered register on the table beside her, and the memory of Roland's hand lingering more vividly than she wished. By morning, London had already begun to interpret her temporary absence. A duchess at her aunt's house could be called filial, ill, offended, guilty, or prudent, depending on who required which version before breakfast. Rowena chose none of them. She dressed in dove-grey muslin, placed her mother's amber vinaigrette in her reticule, and descended to find Roland waiting in Mrs. Valechurch's small front parlour, with the controlled patience of a man who had learned that arrival did not entitle him to welcome. He rose at once. He did not ask if she had slept. They both knew sleep had become another politeness neither of them could afford. "Mr. Vale found something," he said, "at the theatre, partly. At Halewick House as well." Mrs. Valechurch, who had been hovering near the tea-tray, looked as if she might object to anything involving Rowena returning too soon. But Rowena spoke first. "Then I should see it." Roland's eyes searched her face for one quiet moment. "Only if you wish." The words would have irritated her a week ago, when they might have sounded like caution. This morning, after the safe cage and the apology, they sounded like effort. "I do," she said. The carriage ride back to Halewick House was properly attended, with Mrs. Valechurch's maid seated opposite, and the register copy folded between Rowena's gloved hands. Roland sat beside the opposite window, not reaching for her, not repeating the intimacy of the previous afternoon, as if a repaired thread could be tugged without risk. That restraint soothed and unsettled her at once. Trust. Rowena was discovering, did not return like a servant answering a bell. It approached slowly, looking for proof that the door would not be locked behind it. At Halewick House, he led her not to the public rooms, nor to the study where dukes kept ledgers and power, but to a small private sitting room off the eastern gallery. The curtains were half drawn against the bright morning. On a round table lay an old opera ticket, a folded note browned at the edges, and a square of linen wrapped in tissue. Rowena stopped at the threshold. The air felt different here, not secretive exactly, but guarded. Roland remained by the door. "May I tell you a story I should have told sooner?" Her fingers tightened around the reticule. "Is it the locked door?" "Yes." She entered and sat because standing would make the room feel like judgment. He did not sit until she had chosen her chair. Then he took the one across from her, leaving the old objects between them. 5 years ago, my sister Elspeth was 17 and determined to believe the world kinder than it is. She attended the opera under the care of a lady we trusted. During the interval, she received a message supposedly from a gentleman of respectable family, asking for one private word near the passage, behind the boxes. Rowena's heart slowed, then struck harder. The corridor returned in another shape, not false this time, almost fatal. She went? She meant to. She was young, flattered, and afraid of seeming rude. His voice did not change, but the hand resting on his knee had curled slightly. A servant stopped her before she reached the passage. He had received a warning from an unknown young lady who said Elspeth was being watched and that the message was a trap. The servant did not know the lady's name. He remembered only that the warning had been wrapped around a handkerchief carrying an amber scent. Rowena looked at the linen square on the table. Her mouth had gone dry. "I do not understand." Yet she did, not fully, not enough. But memory had begun moving, not as a single door opening, but as a corridor of small lamps being lit one after another. Another opera, another interval. Christabel laughing in a retiring room. Quentin younger, smoother, boasting about a Westgrave girl too eager to be admired. Rowena herself, not yet hardened by years of usefulness, hearing enough to feel sick and not enough to be certain. She had not known the girl. She had only known that a girl was being led somewhere dishonorable by people who would later call her foolish. "I overheard something," Rowena whispered, "at the opera, years ago." Roland did not move. "What did you hear, Christabel and Quentin?" "I thought they were speaking of some country girl. I remember Christabel saying the girl would be ruined by her own vanity if she came when summoned." Quentin laughed. He said no one would blame the messenger if the lady walked into the corridor herself. Her throat tightened. "I was not certain. I had no proof. I found a Westgrave servant near the stair and told him there might be danger. I wrapped the note in a handkerchief because I was afraid he would ignore a spoken warning from a girl he did not know." Roland's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, the control was still there. But something had shifted beneath it. Something deeper than gratitude and more painful than relief. "That servant saved my sister from entering the passage. I did not know it was your sister. No, I did not know whether I had imagined the danger." "You did not?" Rowena stared at the old note. "Why did you never find me?" "I tried." The servant remembered Amber, a young lady in pale blue, and the phrase written at the bottom. He opened the folded note with care, not pushing it toward her until she nodded. The handwriting was younger, more hurried, but hers. "Let her leave standing." Rowena felt the room tilt with the force of recognition. "I wrote that." "Yes." She covered her mouth for 1 second, not to conceal tears, but to hold back the sound that wanted to escape. "In the theatre." After Quentin returned her ring, she had said she would not crawl out where she had entered honestly. Roland had heard an echo she had not known she was making. "At the opera," she said slowly. "When you saw my vinaigrette, I suspected that I was the girl. that you might be the woman who had once acted when others hesitated. I knew it more strongly when you refused to beg Mr. Loxam to return. I knew it when you said the scene had been arranged. But you did not know for certain. No. His honesty remained merciless, even toward himself. I married you first, because I knew the world was lying about you. I had seen that kind of lie before. I had seen what it almost did to Elspeth. I would not stand aside while the same machinery closed around another woman. Rowena looked at him across the table. The old opera ticket lay between them like a bridge built out of years they had never shared. "And now?" she asked. The question escaped before pride could stop it. "Now do you remain because of debt?" His expression altered. It was not softness, though it came close. It was the discipline of a man refusing to use tenderness before it had earned the right to be believed. "At first, I married you because I knew the world was lying. What I feel now is no debt." Rowena's breath caught. The words did not declare love. They did something more dangerous for this stage of their uncertain marriage. They made love possible without naming it too soon. She looked down before he could see how deeply they had entered. "Then why tell me now?" "Because I should have trusted you with the reason before my fear made me control your doors." "Yes," she said. The answer hurt them both, which was why it had to be spoken. "And because," he continued, "Mr. Vale has discovered that the original box counterfoil connected to the night of your abandonment passed through Lady Mariscombe's servant accounts. Not officially, hidden among gratuities." Rowena lifted her head. The past loosened its hold just enough for the present danger to sharpen. Christabel's maid, likely, not proven yet, and the same pattern was used against Elspeth. Yes. A corridor, a servant's statement, a woman made to look as if she sought what was arranged for her. Rowena stood and crossed to the window because sitting still had become impossible. The spring square outside looked absurdly calm. Carriages rolled. A boy swept steps. Somewhere, Christabel could still be fastening her gloves, believing violet perfume had left only fragrance behind. "They had practice," Rowena said. "They did, and I stopped them once without knowing whom I saved." "Yes." She turned back. "Then this time, I shall stop them, knowing exactly whom they intend to ruin." Roland rose, but he did not come closer. He had learned, perhaps, that her resolve needed space to stand upright. "You will not stop them alone." "No," Rowena said, meeting his eyes. "But neither will you stop them without me." A faint, grave inclination of his head. Agreed. The word was a vow of a different kind, quieter than the chapel and stronger for being chosen after error. Rowena returned to the table and touched the edge of her younger self's note. She did not pick it up. It belonged to the past, and for now, its place was here under Roland's care. Her amber vinaigrette remained in her reticule, with her in the present. That distinction mattered. Nothing would be confused. Nothing would be made to appear where it had not been carried. A knock came at the door. Mr. Vale entered only after Roland permitted it, his face lit with the grim satisfaction of a man who had chased a thread and found cloth. "Your Grace," he said, bowing first to Roland, then to Rowena, "the counterfoil has been traced. It was issued to a maid in Lady Christabel Peverell's service, though entered afterward under Lady Mariscombe's household expenses." Rowena felt the first clean edge of proof slide into place. Roland looked at her, not to command, not to shield, but to ask without speaking whether she wished to continue. She did. "Then," Rowena said, "we know where the false corridor began." Mr. Vale hesitated. "There is more, Your Grace." The maid has not yet spoken, but the porter has asked whether confession would protect him from prosecution. Roland's gaze sharpened. Rowena's hand closed around the reticule where the amber bottle rested, steady and silent. The lie had not collapsed, not yet, but it had begun at last to fear the truth. By the time Mr. Vale finished speaking, the private sitting room no longer felt like a room at all. It felt like the narrow place between accusation and proof where every object had to be kept in its proper order or the truth would collapse beneath its own weight. Rowena stood with her reticule in one hand, and the old note on the table before her, the note she had written 5 years earlier, without knowing she was saving Lady Elspeth Westgrave. Beside it lay the opera ticket from that older evening, browned at the edges, and Mr. Vale's newly delivered memorandum naming the box counterfoil issued to Christabel's maid. The present had folded itself around the past with such precision that Rowena could no longer pretend cruelty was accidental. It had habits, it had methods, it learned which doors women were forbidden to enter, then wrote their names beside those doors. Roland stood at the end of the table, one hand resting near the old ticket but not touching it, as though even paper connected to his sister's fear deserved gentleness. The porter asked for protection, he said. Not in those words, Your Grace, Mr. Vale answered. He asked whether a man who repeated what he was told might be treated differently from a man who invented it. He understands the distinction now that he is afraid. Yes, Your Grace. Rowena looked at the memorandum. Where is he? In a back room at my office, Your Grace. Watched, but not threatened. Good, Roland said. Fear has already bought too much testimony. Mr. Vale inclined his head. There is one more matter. The maid, in Lady Christabel's service, has not confessed, but she sent word, through her cousin, that she was given a ribbon to carry to Mr. Loxham's servant on the night of the opera. She claims she did not know it was to be tied around a ring. Rowena's hand closed slowly over the clasp of her reticule. The ring, the black ribbon, and the slit opera program were still in the locked drawer of her sitting room, exactly where she had left them. They had not moved since she returned from her aunt's house, because evidence deserved more fidelity than feelings. Then the ribbon passed through Christabel's household before it reached Quentin, she said. So it appears, Mr. Vale replied. Roland's gaze turned to her. He did not speak first. He had learned. That small restraint moved through Rowena more deeply than any reassurance would have done. We need the ring, ribbon, and program placed with the solicitor, she said, not hidden in my drawer and not carried loose in my reticule like some sentimental wound. Only if you choose to release them, Roland said. I do. She turned to Mr. Vale. Mrs. Barrow has the spare key to my sitting room drawer. She may unlock it in my presence only. The objects are to be placed in a sealed packet, marked by your hand and mine, then taken to the solicitor. No one is to say the Duchess surrendered them. Say, the Duchess entered them into evidence. Mr. Vale bowed, but the flicker in his eyes was not obedience alone. It was respect. Yes, Your Grace. When he left, Roland remained silent for one long breath. You should not have had to become so exact about your own humiliation, he said. No, Rowena answered, but I would rather be exact than pitied. They walked together to her sitting room, with Mrs. Barrow summoned as witness. The housekeeper unlocked the drawer, then stepped back. Rowena lifted the ring first. The black ribbon still clung to it, violet scent faint, but not gone. Quentin's program came next, slit neat and cruel through the printed paper. The altered register copy lay elsewhere, already in Roland's keeping. and the original remained at the theatre. Nothing was confused. Nothing existed in two places at once. Rowena placed each item on a square of clean linen. Roland watched, his face unreadable to anyone who did not now recognize the ache beneath control. "Do you wish me to do it?" he asked. "No." Her voice did not shake. "He returned the ring to me. I will be the one to decide what becomes of it." She folded the linen once, then again. Mrs. Barrow brought sealing wax and paper. Rowena signed across the flap first. Roland signed beneath her name, not above it. By evening, the sealed packet had gone with Mr. Vale to the solicitor, accompanied by the porter's request to confess, the counterfoil memorandum, the copied register page, and the note from Christabel's maid's cousin. Halewick House settled into tense efficiency around them. Servants moved quietly. Doors opened and closed. The false corridor was no longer only a rumor. It had become a route with footprints. In the amber conservatory adjoining Rowena's rooms, the air held the clean scent of bitter orange and damp earth. Rowena stood beside the glass, watching lamplight reflect against the darkening panes. Roland entered only after she answered his knock. He held a note in his hand. "The solicitor has confirmed receipt," he said. "The porter will give his account before witnesses tomorrow morning." "And Lady Mariscombe?" "Still believes the register protects her. Then the final room must be hers." He looked at her sharply. "No." The word came too quickly, and both of them heard the old pattern inside it. Roland stopped. Rowena turned from the glass. This time she did not need to accuse him. He accused himself. His hand tightened around the note, then released. "Forgive me. I heard myself." "Did you?" "Yes." He drew a breath, slow and disciplined. "Tell me what you intend." She crossed to the small table where her amber vinaigrette lay unopened. The lie began at the opera and was dressed by its patronesses. Lady Mariscombe displayed the register in her salon because she believed a drawing room gave her power. But the register belongs to the King's Theatre subscription room. If she wished to make my name a matter of opera house record, then the correction should happen there. Before the patronesses, before the women who heard the accusation and the men whose servants were used to build it. Quentin must be present. Christabel must be present. The porter, the maid, if she will speak, Mr. Vale, and the solicitor. Roland's expression darkened. That room will be merciless. So was the opera. So was the salon. Mercy did not save my name. I know. The words came low, roughened by feeling he did not let become command. I know, Rowena, but I do not know how to watch you be wounded and remain still. There it was. No duke's certainty, no rank. Only the man who had once failed to reach a sister before a corridor nearly swallowed her future, and who now feared watching another woman stand where society had sharpened its knives. Rowena felt something inside her loosen. Not weakness, recognition. She stepped toward him before she could turn the impulse into caution. Roland went utterly still. "Rowena!" She did not answer with words. She placed her hands against the front of his coat and leaned into him, not collapsing, not seeking rescue, but offering and asking comfort in the same breath. For one suspended second he did not move. Then, very softly, he said, "May I hold you?" Her eyes closed. "Yes." His arms came around her with exquisite care, as though permission were not a door flung open, but a threshold to be honored. He did not crush her against him. He did not claim relief for himself alone. He simply held her while the glass panes caught the lamplight and the orange blossoms breathed their clean fragrance around them. Rowena rested her cheek briefly against the dark cloth of his coat. She could feel his heart, steady but not untouched. The embrace did not erase the accusation. It did not solve the register, or the porter, or Christabel's violet ribbon, but it made the coming room feel less like a scaffold and more like a place she could enter with someone beside her who had finally learned not to stand in front of her shadow. When she drew back, he released her at once, though his hands lingered in the air for half a heartbeat before falling to his sides. The restraint made the embrace more powerful, not less. Rowena opened the amber vinaigrette on the table, inhaled once, and closed it again. "I will carry this tomorrow," she said, "not because I am afraid." Roland's gaze held hers. "Because they borrowed it for a lie, and you will return it to the truth." Yes, outside, the last light drained from the square. Inside, the sealed evidence moved through London under the solicitor's care. The ring, the ribbon, and the programme were no longer private relics. The altered register had a witness. The counterfoil had a path. The porter had fear enough to become useful. Rowena placed the vinaigrette in her reticule and fastened the clasp. "Then let them watch me enter by the front door," she said. Roland bowed his head, not as a duke granting permission, but as a husband accepting command. "Beside you," he said, and for the first time, the word did not sound like protection. It sounded like a promise he meant to keep. The King's Theatre looked different by daylight. Stripped of music and candlelit mercy, without the glow of evening dress and the upward sweep of voices from the stage, its corridors showed their true nature. Narrow, polished, and built for movement that could be seen or hidden, depending on who owned the door. Rowena entered through the front with her amber vinaigrette in her reticule, and Roland beside her, not ahead, not guiding her elbow as though she might falter. The sealed evidence packet had arrived earlier, with the solicitor marked by her signature and Roland's beneath it. The returned ring, the black ribbon, and Quentin's slit opera program were no longer private wounds. They waited inside that packet like witnesses who had learned patience, in the subscription room behind the main staircase. Lady Mariscombe had gathered her chosen audience and discovered too late that Roland had expanded it. Lady Tukes sat stiffly near the window. Mrs. Armitage clutched her handkerchief. Two other patronesses whispered until the Duke's solicitor opened his case. Mr. Vale stood near the door with the opera clerk. The porter, Mr. Nellis, looked smaller than he had in Lady Mariscombe's salon. Near the fireplace, Quentin Loxham kept one hand tucked inside his coat, as if dignity could be held in place by posture. Christabel stood beside him in violet-trimmed muslin, and Rowena knew by the pale strain around her cousin's mouth that the colour had become less an adornment than a confession. Lady Mariscombe smiled when Rowena entered. It was a brave smile, in the way a cracked cup might pretend not to leak. "Your Grace, I had understood this was to be a quiet clarification." Rowena removed her gloves slowly. "So did I, until quiet clarification was used to accuse me." Roland said nothing. The silence he gave her now was not abandonment. It was room. The solicitor placed the altered register copy on the table, then, with the opera clerk's assistance, opened the original subscription register to the proper page. Every head bent toward it. Rowena did not. She had seen her name in that false place often enough. She watched faces instead. Quentin frowned at the register, as though seeing an unpleasant weather report. Christabel did not look at it at all. Lady Mariscombe looked only once, then away. "The disputed entry," the solicitor said, "records Her Grace near a private corridor before the interval. The ink used for that line differs from the entries written earlier that evening. It is darker, because it was entered after the surrounding ink had dried. Lady Mariscombe lifted one brow. Clerks are imperfect men. The opera clerk reddened. My lady, the register was removed from my desk during the second act. I reported the misplacement, though I was instructed later that the matter was not worth troubling the committee. Instructed by whom? Rowena asked. The clerk looked at Lady Mariscombe. He did not speak. He did not need to. The solicitor opened the sealed packet next. The opera program lay first, its slit visible beneath the printed cast. This program was delivered to Lady Rowena during the interval. The ring was secured through this slit, tied with this black ribbon. The ribbon was lifted with tweezers, not fingers. Its faint violet scent seemed to bloom even in daylight, the scent on the ribbon. The solicitor continued. Matches the oil used on a pair of gloves surrendered this morning by Lady Christabel Peverell's maid. Christabel laughed. It was too light and broke too quickly. A servant's gloves prove nothing. Violet is common. Rowena turned to her. Then you will not mind saying whether you handled my opera cloak before we left Peverell House. I was helping you, yes. You were close enough to see what I carried, close enough to know about the amber vinaigrette, close enough to tell a porter what he should pretend to have seen before it fell from my hand. Mr. Nellis made a sound that was almost a sob. The solicitor looked to him. Mr. Nellis, repeat your corrected statement. The porter gripped his hat. I saw a lady in a dark cloak near the passage, but I didn't see her Grace's face. I was told afterward it must have been her Grace. I was told to say amber because the lady carried amber. I never saw the bottle plain. Who told you? Roland asked. Not loudly. The porter shook. Lady Mariscombe's man first, your Grace. Then Miss Peverell's maid said it had to be so, or I would be blamed for allowing a lady near the wrong passage. Lady Mariscombe rose. This is intolerable. My servant's answer to me, not to gossip frightened out of a porter by ducal pressure. Roland's eyes moved to her. Then it is unfortunate for your argument that my solicitor took the statement before the theatre clerk, Mr. Vale, and Reverend Merrow, with no Westgrave servant in the room. Lady Mariscombe sat, not because she wished to, because every woman present had watched her knees consider failing. Mr. Vale placed a small paper counterfoil beside the register. This was issued for access near the private box passage on the night in question. It was entered later under Lady Mariscombe's household gratuities, but the first mark on it belongs to Lady Christabel Peverell's maid. She has admitted carrying the black ribbon to Mr. Loxham's servant before the interval. Quentin's face went waxen. Rowena looked at him then fully. You told the salon you acted because you believed I had pursued his grace, yet the ring was tied before the interval, before his grace escorted me, before he even spoke to me. Quentin's throat moved. I was misled. By whom? He looked at Christabel. Christabel stared back with blazing warning. The room saw it. That was the beauty of truth when given enough space. It did not always need to shout. Sometimes it only allowed people to look where they had been trained not to. I was promised, Quentin said, each word dragged from vanity, that the matter would be managed, that Lady Rowena would be pitied, not blamed, that there would be no lasting harm. Rowena almost laughed, but there was no humor left in her for him. No lasting harm to whom? He did not answer. To me, she asked. To my name? To the woman you courted while arranging to abandon her, or only to yourself? Christabel stepped forward, color burning in her cheeks. You were always so composed, so superior in your quiet way. Everyone praised your dignity as if feeling less made you better. Do you know what it is to sit beside a woman who needs Nothing, while every man calls that virtue. Rowena felt the old cut of envy at last, exposed and small beneath the silk. I needed many things, she said. I merely learned not to ask them from people who enjoyed refusing me. Christabel's face changed. For 1 second, shame almost reached her, then pride closed over it. Lady Mariscombe tried one final time. Whatever youthful imprudence may have occurred, surely we need not ruin several families over an unfortunate misunderstanding. Roland stepped beside Rowena, close enough for support, not enough to overshadow. House Westgrave will no longer receive Mr. Loxham, Lady Christabel Peverell, or any household represented by Lady Mariscombe's patronage until restitution is made publicly. I will not dictate how society conducts itself. I will only make clear where honour has chosen to stand. Lady Tukes slowly rose. I believe my carriage is waiting, Lady Mariscombe. Mrs. Armitage followed. One by one, the patronesses withdrew their silent allegiance from the woman who had taught them to wound politely. Lady Mariscombe did not collapse. Women like her rarely did. They hardened, but in that hardening, Rowena saw the end of her power. Roland turned to Rowena. There is one further matter, but it is yours to permit. She knew before he said it. Lady Elspeth, the old opera corridor. The warning note wrapped in amber scent. Rowena looked around the room. These women had heard her accused of pursuing rank through secrecy. Let them hear what secrecy had once protected. You may say it. Roland's voice changed when he spoke of his sister. It became quieter, which made the room listen more closely. 5 years ago, my sister Lady Elspeth Westgrave was nearly lured into a private passage in this theatre by a similar arrangement. She was saved because an anonymous young lady overheard enough cruelty to act. That young lady was Rowena Peverell. She sought no advantage. She asked for no thanks. She protected another woman's name when no one was watching. The silence afterward was complete, not polite, not doubtful, complete. Rowena felt it move through her, not as triumph, but as the delayed return of something stolen. The right to be known by her actions rather than by others' inventions. She turned to Quentin. Did you abandon me because I was unworthy, or because you knew I would not be easy to own? Quentin looked away. That was answer enough. The reckoning ended without applause. It was better that way. Applause would have made theatre of justice. What followed was quieter and more useful. Patronesses leaving, servants speaking, a solicitor collecting proof. Lady Mariscombe staring at a register that no longer obeyed her. Christabel standing with Violet at her wrists, and no room left to hide inside fragrance. Rowena walked from the subscription room before Roland did. In the corridor, the same kind of corridor people had used to write danger around women. She stopped beneath a narrow window. Her breath came unsteadily now that no one needed her composure. Roland approached, then halted at a respectful distance. Do you want air or home? He asked. The question, simple and unadorned, nearly broke her. Home, she said. Then, because the word had surprised them both, she added, Halewick House. For tonight. His expression softened by a degree so small no stranger would have seen it. Then I will take you home. She looked at him in the pale corridor light. Roland. He went still. She had not used his name before an audience. There was none now, only distance, proof, and the fragile quiet after justice. Yes, I don't want to be kissed because I was brave. His eyes darkened with feeling held under discipline. Nor would I offer that. Then why would you? He took one slow breath. Because I have wanted to, since before I had the right to ask, and because wanting is not enough unless you want it too. Her heart answered before pride could. She did not step away. "Ask me," his voice lowered. "May I kiss you, my Duchess?" Rowena's throat tightened, but she smiled faintly through it. "As Roland, not as my rescuer. As Roland." She stepped toward him first. The kiss was gentle, brief, and entirely unlike rescue. His hand did not seize her. It rose only to hover near her shoulder until she leaned closer, and then he touched her lightly. As if trust were something living that could be startled, Rowena kissed him back, not with gratitude, not with obligation, but with the first clear answer her heart had given since the night her ring was returned. When they parted, the corridor remained only a corridor. It had lost its power to frighten her. Roland looked at her as though rank, scandal, and justice had all fallen away, leaving only the woman before him. In the carriage home, Rowena kept his hand in hers and did not let go when the theatre disappeared behind them. "Now," she said softly, watching London blur past the window, "tell me what you want when no one is watching." Halewick House received them after the reckoning not with triumph, but with a hush so deep Rowena could hear the soft fall of wax from a candle in the hall. Mrs. Barrow had clearly instructed the servants to offer no congratulations, no curious glances, no foolish smiles. That restraint was a kindness Rowena felt at once. She had been watched by opera glasses, weighed by patronesses, measured by enemies, and vindicated beneath the hard light of evidence. Now she wanted no audience, not even a loyal one. Roland handed his hat and gloves to the butler, then turned to her, as if the question from the carriage still lived between them. "Tell me what you want when no one is watching." He had not answered then. Perhaps he had known the answer deserved a room, not a carriage, rocking through Mayfair after scandal. "Will you come to the conservatory?" he asked. "The amber one?" "Yes." She removed her gloves slowly. Then yes, he did not offer his arm. She did not need it. They walked side by side through the quiet passages to the small conservatory, adjoining her rooms, where bitter orange blossoms filled the warm glass chamber, and lamplight turned every amber bottle on the shelves into a captured sunset. Her mother's vinaigrette lay on the little table near the window, returned there before she went to the theatre that morning. Rowena touched it, then left it closed. She had carried it into the room where they tried to define her. She had not opened it there. That seemed to matter. Roland stood across from her with something in his hand, a small velvet box, worn at the corners, unfamiliar enough that she knew at once it had not come from a jeweller's tray prepared for romance. "This belongs to you," he said. He opened it. Quentin's returned betrothal ring rested inside, cleaned of dust but not made beautiful by the effort. The black ribbon was gone from it, kept with the solicitor's evidence packet. The ring looked smaller now, without its theatre of cruelty. Smaller and sadder. Rowena did not reach for it. Why return it? Because it was used to shame you. I do not want it to remain only in the solicitor's packet or in Mr. Loxham's story. It should be kept or discarded by your choice. I will not wear it. I did not imagine you would. Then I will keep it for a little while, she said, not because it matters, but because once I would have believed losing it meant losing my future. Roland closed the box and placed it on the table beside the unopened vinaigrette. Your future was never his to return. The words were gentle, but she felt the ache beneath them. She had stood publicly cleared. She had heard him praise her before patronesses. She had kissed him in a corridor that no longer frightened her. Yet the deepest question remained untouched. Was she loved or honored? Desired or protected? Chosen as woman or preserved as proof that the Duke of Halewick could right a wrong? Roland seemed to understand that the silence was not empty. He faced her fully. I owe you more than public defense. Rowena's breath slowed. Do you? Yes. I owe you an apology, without urgency, without witnesses, and without the excuse of danger pressing against the door. He looked down once, then back at her. I hid information from you because I feared another room like the one that nearly took Elspeth's name. I told myself I was preventing pain. I was also preventing your authority over your own life. That was my failure. Not society's, not Lady Mariscombe's. Mine. Rowena held herself still, because the words entered more deeply than any denial would have. You were afraid. Yes, and you made me pay for fear I did not cause. His face tightened. Yes. I can forgive a man who learns, she said quietly. I cannot forgive one who calls control love and asks me to be grateful for it. Then I will spend whatever time I am given proving I have learned. There was no dramatic vow in it, no insistence that he deserved belief, Fried. That, more than the apology itself, made something inside her begin to loosen. You asked in the carriage what I wanted when no one was watching, he said. I did. I want to stop being only the man who arrives when harm has already begun. I want to be the man who sits beside you before it comes. I want your laughter in this house, if it ever chooses to live here. I want your anger when I deserve it. I want your counsel when I am proud. I want to know the sound of your step in rooms where no one is measuring whether you belong. His voice lowered, roughened by restraint. I love you, Rowena. Not because you saved my sister, not because you needed my name. I love you because you stand where others would kneel and still choose mercy. The words did not strike like thunder. They entered like light, entering a room long shuttered, and Rowena discovered that she had been waiting for fear to spoil them. Debt did not. Gratitude did not. Rank did not. His eyes held hers, steady and vulnerable, in a way his reputation would never have believed. She thought of the opera program, the ring, the ribbon, the false register, the corridor, the hand offered in the carriage after he had failed her, the careful question before every touch. She thought of herself abandoned before London, then seen not as ruined but as standing. And I love you, Roland, she said. His breath caught. She heard it. Not because you rescued me, because you learned to stand beside me, not over me. Because when you were wrong, you did not ask me to pretend you were right. Because you looked at my silence and did not mistake it for emptiness. For a moment, he did not move at all. Then he crossed to the table and lifted the ring of Duchess keys she had returned days before. They lay heavy in his palm, every key a little brightness of authority. He held them out, but did not press them upon her. Will you accept these again? He asked. Not as proof that the house owns you, not as apology dressed in metal, only if you wish Halewick House to be yours, and only if we decide together what that means. Rowena looked at the keys. She remembered placing them on the table, each one landing like a wound. Now they waited without command. Slowly, she placed her hand beneath his. He let the keys fall gently into her palm, then kept his hand under hers for one quiet second, supporting the weight without taking it. I will accept them, she said, but I will learn every lock. A smile touched his mouth, small and real. I expected nothing less. She closed her fingers around the keys. This time, their weight did not feel like obligation. It felt like entrance. A knock sounded at the outer sitting room door, and Roland withdrew at once. Mrs. Barrow entered with 3 letters on a tray, apologizing for the hour, but explaining that the Duke's solicitor had sent immediate confirmation. Roland opened them only after Rowena nodded. The consequences were quieter than vengeance, and more satisfying for being durable. Mr. Loxham had lost 2 promised introductions, and 1 political patron who did not wish the Westgrave name against him. Lady Christabel Peverell had been removed from London by her family under the excuse of a sudden country visit, though no one who mattered would believe it. Lady Mariscombe had resigned from the Opera Patroness Committee before she could be asked to do so, which in society meant she had already been judged and wished to name her own sentence. Rowena listened without smiling. Punishment did not restore innocence, because innocence had never been lost. But it did restore proportion. Those who had arranged humiliation would now live under the weight of being known. When Mrs. Barrow withdrew, Rowena set the keys beside the velvet box and opened the amber vinaigrette. The sharp scent rose softly. She inhaled once, then laughed under her breath, surprised by the sound. "I do not need it tonight." Roland's expression changed as if that quiet laugh had given him something no public victory could. "No, no, but I am glad it is here." He stepped closer, and this time she stepped closer too. No corridor, no witnesses, no rescue, only a glass room full of amber light, and the truth finally spoken without disguise. He lifted his hand slowly enough that she could refuse, and when she did not, he touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers, light as a question. She turned into the touch. Then she rested her forehead briefly against his chest, and his arms came around her with the gentleness he had promised before he had words for it. "Rowena," he whispered, "my wife." She smiled against the dark cloth of his coat. "Roland," she answered, "my love." Outside, London continued to gossip, because London knew no other profession so well. Inside Halewick House, the candles burned steadily. The keys lay where she had chosen to place them. The discarded ring sat powerless in its box, and the amber bottle remained open beside them, not as medicine against humiliation, but as witness to the first quiet hour in which Rowena did not have to survive being seen. Harrowmere Park appeared in the late afternoon of the following week, not as a refuge from scandal, but as a house waiting to become a home by choice. Rowena saw it first through a break in the Hampshire trees, its pale stone warmed by spring sunlight, its long windows catching the sky, its lawns falling gently toward a lake where reeds moved in the wind. The journey from London had taken most of the day, with fresh horses, a proper stop for luncheon, and enough quiet miles for the noise of Mayfair to loosen from her thoughts. Roland sat beside her rather than opposite, because somewhere between the subscription room, the conservatory, and the spoken words that had changed everything, distance had stopped being necessary proof of respect. His hand rested near hers on the carriage seat, not claiming, simply there. Twice, over rough road, his fingers had touched hers. Twice she had let them remain. The amber vinaigrette lay in her reticule with the Duchess keys, not because she feared faintness, but because some objects deserved to witness the places one survived to reach. The returned ring remained behind at Halewick House in its velvet box, powerless and named. The black ribbon, opera program, register copy, and counterfoil stayed with the solicitor, where evidence belonged. Nothing false had been carried into this new beginning. When the carriage turned beneath the stone arch and drew up before the entrance, the servants of Harrowmere Park stood in ordered lines along the steps. Rowena felt the old pressure gather. A house could welcome or judge. A household could bow and still withhold its heart. Roland looked at her, his expression quiet. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she said, then smiled because the answer no longer frightened her. "But I don't require readiness to step down. No, he said, only choice. He descended first and turned back, offering his hand before the assembled household as etiquette required. Rowena placed her gloved fingers in his. This time, when she stepped from the carriage, the gesture did not feel like rescue displayed for others. It felt like partnership made visible. The steward bowed. The housekeeper curtsied. Footmen lowered their eyes with proper respect. But Rowena sensed no hunger for scandal in them, only the wary interest any household feels when history arrives wearing a new gown. Your Grace, the housekeeper said, Harrowmere Park is honoured. Rowena had heard enough false honour in London to distrust the word, but this woman's voice held no polish of malice. Thank you, Mrs. Ellard, she said, having learned the names during the journey from Roland's careful notes. I hope to know the house properly before asking it to know me. Mrs. Ellard's eyes softened by the smallest degree. Roland heard it. He did not praise her aloud. His thumb brushed once across the back of her glove before he released her hand, a private acknowledgement hidden inside public form. Inside, Harrowmere held a different silence from Halewick House. The London house had been disciplined by scrutiny. This one seemed to breathe from older lungs. Sun lay across flagstones. Portraits watched from panelled walls, but their judgment had been thinned by generations of dust and weather. In the morning room, a silver tray waited with letters, newly arrived from London. Roland sorted them without opening what was hers. One bore the Westgrave seal slanted in a feminine hand. Elspeth, he said. Rowena took the letter slowly. She had known it might come. She had not expected her heart to answer so quickly. Roland stood near the window, giving her space. She broke the seal and read. Lady Elspeth Westgrave wrote without melodrama that made the gratitude harder to bear. She remembered the night at the opera only in fragments. The music, the foolish thrill of being summoned. The servant who stopped her, the handkerchief with amber scent, the sentence that had made her weep only after reaching safety. Let her leave standing. She wrote that she had often wondered who had seen danger, and acted when so many others would have called silence prudence. She wrote that she hoped, when Rowena was ready, they might meet not as saved girl and rescuer, but as sisters by marriage who both knew what it cost a woman to be believed. Rowena lowered the page. The room blurred once, then cleared. Roland did not cross to her. May I? He asked. She handed him the letter. He read it. And for the first time since she had known him, the grief in his face did not seem like a locked room. It seemed like a window opened carefully after long winter. She sounds kind, Rowena said. She is, and stronger than you feared. His mouth curved faintly. Most women are. You have become very wise, Your Grace. Painfully instructed, Duchess. The gentle dryness in his voice made her laugh, and this time the sound did not surprise her as much. It belonged in the room. Later, after they had taken tea and Mrs. Ellard had shown her the principal rooms, Roland led Rowena to the conservatory on the south side of the house. Harrowmere's glass house was larger than the one adjoining her London suite, warmed by brick flues and bright with orange blossom, myrtle and early roses not yet fully opened. Amber light poured through the panes, caught in watering cans, glazed pots, and the polished brass handle of the door. Rowena removed her reticule and drew out her mother's vinaigrette. The amber glass glowed in her palm as if the day had entered it. I used to think this kept me from breaking, she said. Roland stood beside her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. Did it? Sometimes. But mostly it reminded me that my mother once believed I could steady myself. She placed the vinaigrette on a small table near the glass doors. For a moment, she only looked at it. Then she opened the silver cap. The sharp scent rose into warm air, mixing with orange blossom and damp earth. She did not lift it to her nose at once. She let it breathe without needing it. "Today," she said, "it may simply remember." Roland took her hand then, slowly enough that the choice remained hers until her fingers closed around his. "My love," he said. The words were quiet, but they held the whole journey. The opera box, the false corridor, the salon, the register, the apology, the kiss, the declaration, the house now opening around them. Rowena leaned into him, not from weakness, but because peace also deserved a posture. "I am home," she said. His hand tightened gently. "Here, here, and in myself. The second is newer." He bowed his head until his lips touched her hair, a restrained, tender gesture that asked nothing beyond the moment. Together, they walked the length of the conservatory, hand in hand, while late light moved over the floor. They spoke of practical things because happiness, to be trusted, needed shape, a discreet fund administered through the Duchess of Halewick and Lady Elspeth if she wished to join it. Safe carriage arrangements for young women leaving assemblies, trusted servants at theatres and house parties, quiet assistance for ladies threatened by false letters, corridor traps, coerced engagements, or reputations sharpened into weapons. "It cannot save everyone," Rowena said. "No," Roland answered. "But it can make cowardice less certain of success." She looked up at him. "And no woman helped by it must know my name unless knowing helps her stand. As you choose." There was no hesitation in him now. The phrase no longer repaired a wound. It described the marriage they were making. When the sun sank lower, Rowena returned to the little table. The amber vinaigrette sat open in the light, its silver cap thrown back, no longer hidden in a reticule, no longer clutched beneath opera glasses, no longer borrowed by a lie. It was only itself, a small vessel that had carried sharpness through dark rooms and survived with its glow intact. Roland stood behind her, not looming, not shielding, simply present. In the glass, their reflection appeared together, her hand in his scar softened by evening, her face uncovered by fear. Once, London had watched to see whether she would disappear after being abandoned. Now there was no audience at all, and that was the final mercy. Rowena closed the vinaigrette gently, not to seal away the past, but to let it rest. Then she turned back to Roland, still holding his hand, and walked with him toward the open doors, where the gardens of Harrowmere waited in the spring light, and her life, once returned like a ring in a program, opened freely before her.